This one isn't for the faint of heart. I've taken hundreds, maybe thousands of 911 calls. This is the only one that no matter how much I try, I can never put it behind me. I've worked as a 911 dispatcher for the better part of 5 years now. It's certainly a weird job by normal day job standards, but most emergency responder jobs are, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I had a bit of a troubled upbringing, and I don't know why, but this job makes me feel like I have a genuine purpose. Being able to help people in need is powerfully gratifying and more rewarding than any other job I've ever had. For the most part, over time you get used to the weird and disturbing calls. Drunk arguments that somehow involve a samurai sword. People pissed off that somebody cut them off in traffic and they want the other person arrested. There are darker calls too, obviously, and after a while most of it just rolls off your back. But not all of it. Not this call. Roughly 2 hours left before I was out, I got a call from a woman in her mid-40s. Her voice was calm but clipped, tense. She explained that her ex-husband had showed up at her property after a dispute they'd had during a phone call earlier that day. I asked if he'd made contact. She said no, he was just walking around outside. Not yelling, not banging on anything, just circling like he was looking for a way inside. She said he'd been doing it on and off for almost 30 minutes. I asked her if she felt like she was in immediate danger. There was some hesitation in her voice, but she told me no. She said he hadn't done anything yet, just periodically circled the house before returning to his truck. Allegedly, he'd been showing up randomly over the last couple weeks following their divorce. He'd call her, the conversation would get heated, he'd demand to talk to her in person, she'd say no, and he'd refuse to take that for an answer. Then he'd show up and just sit in his truck in her driveway or nearby on the road and either watch the house or get out and just stand there at the edge of the property smoking. And when he'd realize he'd been spotted, he'd peel out down the road. She said she'd called the police about it earlier that day and a unit did come by, but they didn't find him. I guess in her mind, she felt like this behavior would eventually fizzle out. I kept her on the line while I dispatched another unit. She stayed near the back window while we talked, then started describing what he was doing. He had walked behind the shed and then was heading back around the side of the house toward the porch again. And now he had something in his hand. He wasn't yelling or anything. She said he just looked like he was talking to himself. I tried to keep her talking and she did stay calm, but I could tell it was wearing on her. She said it felt like he was trying to get in her head. Just wanted her to know that whatever he was feeling was so intense that he couldn't help but behave like this. Then she gasped. She told me he'd picked up a chair from the porch and was yelling at her to open the door. I could hear him screaming faintly in the background, and she started to yell at him to leave and that she had called the cops. Then I heard the window break, glass shattering. She was screaming that he was climbing into the house through the window and that she needed help. I told her to get out right away. She told me that she was trying, and I could hear heavy breathing and that she was running while talking to me. Then she was screaming again, and there was some kind of struggle on the other end of the line. There were banging sounds and slamming and screaming and yelling. Then, and this was truly the worst thing I've ever experienced at this job, in the exact detail I've talked with multiple counselors about because I cannot get it out of my mind. It was this horrible sound. It was like you could hear someone hitting a watermelon with a hammer again and again. And then it was just quiet. I kept calling her name, but there was nothing. The line was still open. I stayed on, trying to listen. I thought I might have heard footsteps, maybe someone breathing, but I couldn't be sure. The officers arrived maybe 4 minutes later. They radioed in almost immediately. Woman was down, unconscious, EMS needed. She didn't make it. Blunt force trauma. She was repeatedly hit in the head with something heavy. They found the ex-husband 2 hours later not far from the property. Cuts all over his hands and arms. Claimed he didn't remember how he got them. He's in jail now. You get a lot of bad calls on this job, and a lot of them you learn to push down. But hers wasn't one of those. The image that I can't shake in my imagination is her just standing there on the phone watching him through the window, watching him walk around, waiting for him to go away, hoping help would come in time. But it didn't. The sound of her voice and screams pop into my head sometimes. It's like a recurring nightmare that happens when I'm awake or trying to fall asleep. That one moment where everything changed for her. That was the last call she ever made, and I'm the total stranger who was on the other end. It's such a strange feeling to know I'm the last person in the world who she talked to before she died. It's the one phone call I can never forget. This happened maybe 2 years ago. I'm a patrol officer in a small suburban department. Been doing this about 10 years now. Not quite old-timer status, but long enough to have seen the usual range of strange and bad. I was cruising through one of the quieter parts of town. Average shift, mostly traffic stops and noise complaints. Nothing major. Early evening, dispatch radioed in a welfare check. A teenager had called in saying they thought someone might be in their house. Heard footsteps upstairs. They were home alone, parents were out of state. I remember having the thought that it was likely nothing. These types of calls usually are. Kid spooks themselves after watching a scary movie, or a squirrel gets in through a vent or something. But I said I'd head over and check it out. It was a nice little 2-story home. Everything looked normal from the outside. I could see that lights were on downstairs, but not upstairs. I parked out front and didn't even bother hitting the lights. As I walked up, the front door flew open. Kid looked around 15, maybe 16, shaky. Still had his phone in his hand. You could tell he was trying to keep it together, but that he was scared. He said he'd been downstairs when he heard what sounded like someone walking around upstairs. Light steps, like someone trying to be quiet. He said he'd called up the stairs, but there was no answer, so he'd locked himself in the laundry room until he heard my car pull up. I asked him if he heard a door open or any windows break, whether he knew if he'd left anything unlocked. The kid just shook his head. He told me that everything was locked when he got home from school and that they didn't have any pets. Nobody else was supposed to be there. His parents were on a trip for work somewhere out west. He had tried calling them but couldn't get a hold of them. I told him to wait outside, and I went in. It was a standard layout. Living room opened up into the kitchen, then a hallway toward the stairs. On the surface, nothing looked out of place. No signs of forced entry, no muddy footprints or anything like that. But you never know. It was totally quiet. Searching someone else's house in total silence is a very unique feeling. TV doesn't even get close to capturing it. It's a thick and heavy, eerie silence. You're hyper aware of every little creak or thunk. I announced my presence and was met with total quiet. I cleared the downstairs first, checked the pantry, closets, under the furniture, and behind the doors. All of it. It was clear. Then I made my way upstairs, and that's where things started to feel different. All the lights were off, whereas on the ground floor, not all, but most of the lights had been on. The kid told me that there should have been lights on upstairs and that he'd left them on. I could see at the end of the hall the master bedroom door was open a crack. The light was off inside, but I could see some cold evening daylight slipping in through a window. I got my flashlight out and turned it on, flipping on any light switches along the way that I could find. I made my way down the hall toward the master bedroom, opening up the rooms and closets along the way, stepping in to check them before returning to the hallway. When I finally arrived outside the master bedroom, I called in and announced myself once again through the cracked door. Then, I pushed it open and scanned my flashlight across the room and under the bed. The bed was unmade and looked slept in. That might have just been how they left it, but something about the room made the hair on my neck go up. I stepped in and swept the room. Nothing at a first glance. And then, I saw the closet door. It was just barely cracked open. Not wide, just enough to catch your eye. Like someone tried to close it in a rush and didn't quite shut it all the way. I called out again. Standard warning, no answer. Then I crossed over to it, stepped to the side, and called out one last time. Nothing. Then I reached out and slowly opened the door. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just clothes, but it stank. I pulled the closet door open the rest of the way, and that's when I saw it. Between two suit jackets hanging from the rack, there was an eye looking back at me. I immediately yanked the rest of the clothing out of the way, and crouching there, trying to hide in the shadows, was a shirtless, emaciated man wedging himself in the corner of the closet. Wide, bloodshot eyes. His face was dirty and shiny with sweat, looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was clutching a grimy backpack and appeared like he was either high or going through withdrawals. He didn't move, just stared at me, making weird whimpering noises. I ordered him out. He didn't fight, just kind of stumbled forward with his hands up. I got him cuffed, walked him downstairs, and radioed it in. A couple other units rolled in a few minutes later. Turns out the guy had come in through a side door that led into the garage, which the kid hadn't checked because he assumed his parents had locked it. There was no damage, no obvious forced entry. He just walked right in. It was unclear how long he'd been staying upstairs because the guy claimed he had just come in. But the teenager mentioned he thought he had heard footsteps upstairs the night before as well. We stayed until a neighbor showed up. Someone the family knew, said the kid could stay with them until the parents got home. You train for all kinds of stuff on this job, but when something like that actually unfolds, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't terrifying as hell. People act like cops aren't just people too, who happen to have to throw themselves into all kinds of crazy situations with the utmost confidence without knowing who or what may be waiting for them. Pulling back that closet door and seeing that eye looking back at me was nothing short of terrifying, and no training could have prepared me for it. People think this kind of thing is rare, but it's not. Most people don't remember to lock every door. Most people don't double check their garage at night before bed. And most people think that when they hear a noise inside, it's just the house settling. I wish it was the case. That kid got lucky. If he'd gone upstairs instead of calling, who knows how it would have gone. The last time I saw my friend Pete was over 3 years ago out in the woods in the middle of nowhere. We went hiking on a primitive trail he'd found north of the mountains where we live. He had always kind of been like that, would find these primitive trails and either go by himself or drag me or another one of our friends along with him. Super introverted guy. You could just see him crumble when he tried to talk to people, so I think when he went out there in those remote places, to him it felt like he was finally free or something. In retrospect, it seemed like he'd been acting weird leading up to it. Kind of paranoid and moody, angry out of nowhere. Just different than I had always known him to be. I didn't consciously dismiss these things, but when people you've known for a long time start acting differently, you just kind of unconsciously look past it as flukes outside the baseline or something. But hindsight is 20/20. Anyway, he dragged me along for this day hike. Just the two of us, our backpacks, and a few caps of mushrooms we ate when we parked the car on the side of the road near the trailhead. I was never really big into hiking. I'm still not. But he had been pushing it for months and had unexpectedly fallen into the mushrooms, so he said to hell with it, let's go. He was the opposite of me, very into hiking and always over-prepared. He brought bear spray, a knife, a whistle, even some other stuff I didn't even know the purpose of. All this gear I would never consider necessary for a day hike. I remember feeling like he was being a little dramatic about it all. We weren't exactly going into the Amazon here, but whatever. It felt like he needed this and I wanted to be a good friend. The mushrooms didn't really hit until we were a couple miles in. It was light mostly. Everything just felt a little more alive. I was split between taking it in and trying to keep up with him because he was hiking faster than me. Finally, we stopped near a big clearing and decided to take a rest. We sat on a downed tree, ate some trail mix, got the mushroom giggles over a few things, and then just sat in silence, taking in the nature. I don't know how much time passed. Things got sort of internal for a while. It felt like a long time, but it honestly could have just been a couple minutes. Without saying much, it felt like his mood kind of shifted or something. Like his energy got darker the longer we sat there. Then, he said he had to take a leak, got up and wandered off the trail. I remember I sat there for a bit, just watching the sunlight like flutter through the leaves. My assumption was that he'd be back in a minute or two at the most, but he didn't come back. With mushrooms, your sense of time gets weird. I've heard it called time dilation. A couple minutes can feel like a very long time, and I wasn't really sure how long he'd been gone, so I checked my phone for a baseline and continued waiting. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I stood up and called out for him, but there was no response. Then I started feeling this swell of anxiety rising up inside me. I wondered if maybe he had found a spot to just sit and think about whatever had been on his mind, or if he wasn't feeling well and just needed a few minutes alone. But something didn't feel right. 15 minutes turned to 30. I was starting to spiral. I called his phone, but it didn't go through. Mine barely had one bar. I didn't want to call in an emergency unless something was seriously wrong, but I also had no idea what was going on or what I was really doing out there. I didn't know the trail, didn't know how to confidently retrace our steps without him, and had no idea if he was coming back or if something had happened or if he got lost or whatever. So in a panic, I called 911. I told him I wasn't sure if it was an emergency yet, I just didn't know what to do. I gave them our location as best I could and the best directions I could give about where we had parked the car. Told them my friend had gone off the trail and hadn't come back. The dispatcher was super calming, told me to stay put, said they'd send someone out and maybe even send a ranger just to be safe. Then I heard something crashing through the woods. My friend came stumbling out of the trees, completely drenched in sweat, holding his knife out in front of him in this defensive posture. He was filthy, like he'd been rolling in the mud or on the forest floor or something, and he looked terrified. He charged up to me and grabbed me by the arm, accidentally knocking the phone out of my hand and almost barreling through me completely. He whispered to me that we had to leave right now. I picked up the phone and barely had time to register that the call had been disconnected when he just started dragging me down the trail, telling me that someone was out there, watching, and they were following us. I couldn't tell if he was joking at first, or having a bad trip or something. I asked him if he was sure it wasn't just the mushrooms messing with him. He wouldn't say anything else, just kept repeating that we had to go and pushing me back down the trail the way we had come. I didn't question him, I just started to panic and run behind him down the trail toward the car. There was no talking. Every minute or so he'd look over his shoulder or suddenly make us stop and whisper for us to listen like he had heard something, which was impossible over our running. I kept trying to tell him to calm down and that I had called 911, but he didn't seem to care. He was just singularly focused on getting out of the woods. At the trailhead, 2 cops were waiting near the car. My buddy completely locked up when they started asking questions, wouldn't make eye contact. Initially, he refused to speak, but then at a certain point gave me this paranoid look and asked to speak with them in private. I think this kind of put a flag up for them, but they obliged and walked him over to one of their cruisers where they talked to him by himself. During their conversation, I would occasionally see them glance over at me like they were talking about me. Then, one of the officers came over and talked to me privately and asked if I was the one that made the phone call. I told him yes and tried to explain what had happened. He asked me if Pete was on something. I told him the truth, but told him it wasn't any more than we'd done in the past. Then, he asked if Pete had any history of mental health problems, and all I could tell him was not that I knew of. They took our names and told us they'd check the trail just to be safe and to stay put. Pete just sat on the ground and never said a word. Wouldn't answer my questions, wouldn't tell me what he saw. They didn't find anything. No signs of anyone else there, no tracks, no gear, nothing. Just us. One of the officers pulled me aside and told me it might be a good idea for him to get evaluated, but that they couldn't make him. Afterwards, we drove back to my place in silence. He slept on the couch that night, but the next morning he was gone. I have no idea what time he left or whether it was even morning or in the middle of the night. I texted him a few times that week, and he replied only once, just a thumbs up emoji. After that, nothing. He stopped answering, stopped hanging out, deleted his social media and moved back in with his parents last I heard. Whatever happened out there broke something in him, and I still don't know what it was. I haven't seen him since that day. Most disturbing thing I've experienced on the subway happened about 7 months ago, so maybe early 2022. I work late a lot, and by the time I'm heading home, the trains are usually pretty empty. This night was the same thing. I got on around maybe 11:30 or 12 after finishing a shift. I was tired and just wanted to zone out for the ride. The car I got into was almost completely empty, except for one guy way down at the far end, slumped over in his seat like he'd been out cold for a while. His head was down, chin on his chest, arms just hanging there. He didn't look homeless necessarily, but he had a bunch of bags with him, and it looked like he was either on drugs or had just had a rough go of it. I didn't pay him much attention. I sat in the middle of the car on the opposite side from him and was just running in my head through all the stuff I had to do the next day. My memory of this whole thing is associated with the smell of the train, which was disgusting, like that metallic brake smell you get underground mixed with like pee. I put my bag down next to me and just tried to relax. We went through a few stops and nothing was really out of the ordinary. I kept my eyes on my phone and was just spacing out to the hum of the train. Then, between stops, we slowed down, which isn't unusual, but then we stopped completely. If you've ever been on a wonky subway train, you know the lights in there can flicker sometimes when the power is weird or if the train is stuck. They flickered a little bit, then just stayed dimmer than they had been before. It wasn't like a total blackout or anything, but it was definitely darker and kind of trippy to be in like a dark subway car. The conductor PA crackled something, but I couldn't really make out what they said. Something about a delay and please be patient. I looked around but couldn't see anything through the windows that would indicate why we had stopped, so I assumed there had been a stalled train in front of us or like an issue with the track or something. The guy at the other end was still slumped over during this. He hadn't even woken up. There wasn't much to do in the situation but just try to be patient. But we just stayed stalled there. Nothing happening, no movement, no information from the conductor. And then I heard the guy at the other end move. It was like he was just shifting around at first. I looked over and it seemed like he was just waking up. Then he started mumbling something I couldn't hear. Not to me, to himself, but it seemed like he was upset about something. I stayed still, trying not to make eye contact. My instinct in those situations, for better or worse, is to pretend like I don't notice other people doing weird things. I have this fear that if people catch me watching them in like an embarrassing private moment, it will like exacerbate the situation or something. So I pretended like I didn't notice he was talking to himself. I just kept staring down at my phone like I hadn't seen him. But then I heard him start moving around. I glanced over, and before I could really clock what was happening, he had dropped down off his seat onto his hands and knees. Not in a slow, careful, I dropped something kind of way. Just suddenly, like it was the most natural thing for him to do. Just flop down. Then he started crawling along the floor, smacking his hands on the tops and bottoms of the seats and looking underneath them like he was searching for something. Then he laid flat on his belly and started pulling himself along with his arms, turning on his side to look under the seats. It was so weird, I thought at first that he might be having a medical issue, but he kept going. He moved in this twitchy way, like his body wasn't working smoothly. His arms would jerk outward when he reached forward, and then he'd like drag himself forward slowly by his palms and stick his tongue out. Every few seconds, he'd stop, tilt his head like he heard something, then keep going. He was muttering the whole time, and some of it didn't even sound like words. I just sat there, completely, totally still. I didn't know what to even do. My brain was telling me to get up and put distance between us, but I also didn't want to draw his attention, and there was only so far I could go before I hit the end of the car, and then I had no idea what else I would even do. At the same time, he was getting closer to me, and I didn't know what he was going to do when he reached me. He kept dragging himself down the aisle, seat by seat, rolling around on the floor and peeking under them and making a mixture of like animal noises and little kid sounds. About halfway to me, he completely stopped, lifted his head, and looked straight at me. It was like he was seeing that I was there for the first time. We just stared at each other for a second, and then he started crawling directly toward me. This wasn't like someone stumbling around drunk. This was like a lizard or something. He'd slam his palms down on the floor and pull himself toward me, dragging himself by the belly along the floor, sticking out his tongue at me. I pressed back against the seat and just tried to stay cool. When he reached me, he didn't stand up. He just stayed there on his belly, panting. I could smell him now. Sweat, BO, and pee. Then, he asked me if I had seen his baby doll. I didn't move, didn't answer. He tilted his head to one side and just stared up at me with one eye. Then, he started making this clicking noise with his mouth. I'm a small person and I had no idea what to do. I didn't want to engage with him, but I also didn't want to piss him off, so I just tried to ignore him and hope he'd lose interest. I don't know what caused it to happen, but then he glanced over his shoulder. I don't know if he thought he heard something or what, but he suddenly shifted his weight back and began crawling away from me, back toward the other end of the car. Same floor slapping and muttering. A second later, the train jolted. The lights came back up to full and we started moving again. I grabbed my bag and stood up near the door. I didn't care if it looked obvious anymore, I just wanted off as soon as possible. We pulled into the next station and I got out. I didn't even look back to see if he had followed me. I just got out and walked directly toward the stairs. When I got to street level, I realized my hands were shaking. I stood there for a minute just trying to catch my breath before heading home. Now, when I'm riding late, I make sure I'm either in a car with more people or right near the conductor's door. I'll stand the whole way if I have to. I don't want to be alone in a subway car with anyone again, especially not someone like that. I was heading home late after meeting a friend for a couple drinks. It was a weeknight and it had gotten late fast, so the station was basically empty. I specifically remember thinking how quiet it felt when I walked down the stairs and got onto the platform. It was that kind of awkward quiet where the only sound is the fluorescent lights humming. The train wasn't due for like 10 minutes. The only other people down there were this group of maybe 4 or 5 young women at the far end of the platform. I'm terrible with age, but they looked maybe mid-20s or so, maybe younger. They were clearly drunk though, holding on to each other, being obnoxious, voices echoing in the tunnel. At first they were laughing, and it was loud enough that I glanced over just to see what the hell was so funny, but it didn't seem like a big deal. So I went back to just kind of zoning out until the train came. After a couple minutes, I noticed their voices had changed. The laughing had turned into like yelling. You could just feel the tone shift. It was more aggressive now and like pointed. I looked over and saw 2 of them standing a little apart from the rest, facing each other. One was waving her hands around and pointing a lot, and the other had her arms crossed and was leaning forward like she was arguing back. The other women seemed to be sort of half trying to calm them down, but not in a serious way. I put my phone in my bag and just put it out of my mind. I didn't want to get involved in whatever it was, and it seemed like they hadn't even noticed I was there. But the yelling kept going. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of them suddenly shove the other. The girl who got shoved stumbled backward, her heel caught right at the edge of the platform, and then she dropped straight down onto the subway tracks. I heard the sound of her hitting the ground, and she let out this awful scream. Then she started scrambling to get back up, fumbling through the dirt and tripping over herself. One of her shoes had come partially off and she was struggling to get her footing, but none of her friends were helping her climb back up. To be honest, I had no immediate response because all of it was so sudden. I don't know if it was shock or just not believing what I'd seen, but it didn't register right away that she was actually on the tracks and we were actively waiting for the train, which would be arriving any minute. When I snapped out of it, I pulled out my phone and started dialing for the police. The second I did that, the one who had shoved her turned and looked straight at me. They literally had no idea I had even been there. Her face went from angry to something else entirely. She yelled out that she was joking and didn't mean to do it, but she was like screaming it at me. 2 of the other girls turned and looked over at me too. And then they all started moving in my direction. Not running full speed, but like beelining it directly toward me. And they were shouting at me. I caught some swearing and I'm pretty sure one of them told me to hang up the phone. I didn't wait around to see what they wanted from me. I turned and ran up the stairs to the street. I could hear them chasing after me, footsteps echoing all over the place. When I got to the top of the stairs, I was already talking to the emergency operator, telling them where I was and what had happened. My heart was pounding so bad, and I was so distracted by whether I was being pursued that I could barely get the words out. When I got to the street level, I kept moving until I was about a block away. I stopped near the corner and looked back toward the station entrance. Nobody came up the stairs after me, which honestly was a huge relief. I stayed on the phone with the operator until they confirmed that they were sending the police and transit staff. Then I hung around the corner for maybe 5 minutes just to see if anyone came out, but it stayed quiet. Eventually, I just walked the rest of the way home. Over the next couple of days, I kept checking the local news on social media, expecting a story about somebody getting hit by a train or rescued from the tracks, but there was nothing, not even a small mention. So I'm guessing she either climbed up on her own or her friends managed to pull her out before the train came. The whole thing really bothered me. I take the subway a lot and I've seen arguments break out before, but this was so messed up, and it happened so fast. One second they were laughing together, and the next second someone was down on the tracks. And then to have them all suddenly turn on me just for calling for help. I've never felt that exposed in public before. Now, I keep as much distance from other people as I can when I'm waiting for the train. I always stand at least several feet back from the edge, and if I see anyone arguing, I move away immediately. When I'm down there, I can't stop obsessing about how easy it is to lose your balance, especially if someone shoves you. That girl doesn't know how lucky she was to not get knocked out or break anything in the fall. Because if that had happened, who knows how things would have ended up. I have a subway nightmare I'll post here. I've been working maintenance on the subway for about 12 years or so, usually overnight shifts because that's the only time the train doesn't run in my city. Once the last train clears and the system's down, we go in and do our thing. Usually it's pretty boring. Definitely can be creepy when you're down there though, but usually nothing I can't handle. This was by far the freakiest thing that's happened to me on the job. The tunnels get really quiet. You hear drips, the low hum from the power that stays on, and random scary sounds, like rats knocking into bottles or running over gravel or whatever. It's a real vibe down there. So this one night I was working in an area where I hadn't been before, and where some of the tracks had recently gone under extended maintenance. This meant that there were no active trains going in and out of there during the day. They just had me walking a stretch of the track between two stations to check wiring and a couple of the signal boxes. Pretty routine stuff. You do it enough times and it's basically the same whatever tunnel you happen to be in. For those who don't know, a lot of the stretches between stations can be unevenly lit. Sometimes there are work lights and sometimes there's just stretches of darkness. This was one of those. I had my usual setup with me, just a flashlight and my radio. I'd been walking maybe 15 minutes when I started hearing something ahead. At first, I thought it was maybe another worker, but we keep pretty good track of who's down there, and I was the only one I knew of who was assigned to that stretch. The sound wasn't tools or anything either. It was softer, kind of like shuffling around. Then I caught something else underneath it. Really faint music, like maybe a little radio or something. That made zero sense. I guess it goes without saying, but there's no reason for music to be coming from anywhere down there, unless someone was where they shouldn't be. I slowed down a bit. My light was sweeping over the walls and gravel, just looking for where it was coming from. Then the smell hit me next. Smoke and like something had burnt. I came around the bend and that's when I could see it. A little setup in one of the alcoves off the tunnel. There was a tarp, some blankets, and what looked like a camp stove sitting on top of a couple cinder blocks. It was clear someone had been living there. Before I could call it in, the flashlight gave away my presence. Immediately, this guy stepped out from behind the tarp to see what was going on. He put his hand up in front of his face to shield his eyes, so it was hard for me to see. But in the glimpse I caught, he was strangely well dressed. Like not clean necessarily, but like he had made an effort to keep up his appearance. It looked like he was wearing a button-up shirt that was tucked into like dress pants or something. I called out to him that he wasn't supposed to be down here, and he immediately started making his way toward me, telling me he was relieved I was there and that something was wrong with his friend, and that he needed my help and it was an emergency, while he pointed deeper into the alcove. My first instinct was to tell him I couldn't go off the main path, but there was something in his tone that sounded desperate, so against my better judgment, I followed him in. I told him to step back, and I had the flashlight up, checking where I was walking because there was so much junk. The place was totally cluttered. Crates, blankets, trash, random stuff like an old suitcase. He kept glancing over his shoulder to make sure I was right behind him and kept telling me that his friend was back here and would point deeper into the encampment. We were heading toward a darker side passage, one of those narrow cuts between two support columns where things get particularly isolated. We went around the corner of the pillar to the area he had been pointing, and I passed my flashlight across the space. But there was nothing there. Literally nothing. No other person, no junk, nothing. Just a little walled-in area set back from the alcove in the main tunnel. It was like its own little private room. I was confused, like maybe I had misunderstood where he wanted me to go. I was also disoriented because we were so isolated and it was pitch dark down there. So I turned to point the flashlight at him to ask if we were in the right spot. And that's when he grabbed at my arm, frantically trying to pull me deeper into that dark corner and peeling the flashlight out of my hand. I twisted and shoved him away with my free arm. The flashlight, which he'd pried from my hand, had dropped to the ground, and this guy was now yanking on my wrist with both his arms, trying as hard as he could to pull me into the darkness. I yanked back with everything I had and stumbled backwards, crashing through the encampment toward the main tunnel. I didn't know if he was following me because I couldn't hear anything over the crashing through all his stuff and the sprinting on the gravel. Maybe 30 yards later, I turned to look back and saw the flashlight beam coming out of the encampment and pointing in my direction from where I had merged back with the tunnel. Then, it looked like the person who was holding it started sprinting toward me. It's not easy running in work boots, but that's what I did until I made it all the way back to the previous station. I radioed what had happened once I knew I was safe, told my supervisor that there was someone living down there and that he'd tried to grab me. They said they'd send someone to check it out. I got back outside and ended up finishing early that night. I needed a few drinks after that. I don't know if they ever found him, but I never got sent back to that stretch again. Whenever I think back on this story, I still get the chills. This happened years back when I was in my 20s. I dropped out of college, didn't have much going on, and was basically just a stoner working random jobs around my hometown. Pretty rural area of the country. A bunch of churches, farms, and even a legit prison nearby. Some people like that kind of life, but it wasn't for me, and I'm glad I eventually got out of there. Most of my friends had either moved away already or went on to school, so it felt especially lonesome during that part of my life. Anyway, one fall I picked up shifts at this family-run corn maze. It wasn't like a major landmark or anything, just something a local farmer set up every October. Groups of people would come out, buy cider and pumpkins, and run around in the maze. The maze was pretty gnarly though. It was in this big field and a surprising amount of people got lost in there. There were lots of groups of younger people too who would sneak in bottles of stuff and use it as a place to party, so it could be kind of a pain getting people out of there at night. Most nights were relatively chill. I'd be pretty ripped a lot of the time, to be honest with you. The hardest part was kicking out teens who thought it was hilarious to hide in the stalks and jump out after dark. It was like every one of them thought that they were the first person to think of it. We weren't supposed to let anyone stay past closing, so I had to do a sweep of the maze at the end of the night. I hated that part. I'd walk through the narrow dirt paths with a flashlight, corn rustling on both sides, always feeling like someone was there with me. Usually it was nothing, or just some kids who bolted when they saw me coming. It was pretty intense though. To be super stoned in there with a flashlight by yourself at night was an experience unto itself. Anyway, this one night it was later than usual when the last group left. I went around shutting off lanterns and string lights and getting ready to close up the place and lock down some equipment. I was halfway back to the storage barn when I heard something rustling from inside the maze. Not just wind, like real movement, like someone hard pushing through the stalks. Then I heard what sounded like whispering. It always kind of pissed me off when this happened because I would literally have to go in and do a whole other clear of the maze. There was no way people didn't come here after hours to screw around, especially on the weekends. Everybody knew it, but you still had to make an effort to get them out of there for liability reasons. I yelled out, told them we were closed, and to head out before I called the cops. Usually that was enough. This time, just silence. Then, clear as day, I heard someone stumble through the stalks and cursed like they had tripped and fallen down. I was over it at that point. If the owner came back in the morning and found kids had trashed the place or ruined one of the walls, it would come down on me. So I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the maze. The deeper I went, the worse it felt. The paths in there were tight, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side, and every turn looked the same. The sound of the rustling kept shifting around. I kept calling out, but no one laughed or giggled like usual. Just that shifting sound and the occasional crunching like they were falling down into the stalks. Then, I turned a corner and my light caught movement up ahead. I locked in on it and saw someone crouched low to the ground trying to hide in the stalks. At first, I thought it was just some drunk or something who got abandoned by his buddies. But then, the beam fully lit him up. He was a mess. He was all dirty and his clothes were ripped up. And that's when I noticed what looked like orange fabric near his boots. Like prison clothes. There was total awkward silence. Both of us just standing there on opposite ends of this path, with my flashlight beaming on this guy trying to hide crouched in the stalks. He had this expression of like pure desperation, then held up a finger to his lips and gestured with his other hand for me to leave. Not like a joke, not like he was trying to scare me. He was dead serious. This dude was legit hiding in the fucking corn maze. I was alone, no weapon, and standing 10 feet from someone who clearly wasn't supposed to be there, and who very obviously was heavily invested in no one finding out he was there. Before I could think about what to do, he shot out of the stalks toward me. It was fast and desperate, just like pure survival instinct. I turned and ran at a full sprint, tripping on the uneven ground and crashing through the stalks, my flashlight swinging around everywhere. I couldn't tell if I was heading toward the edge of the maze or deeper into it. I was just running in a total blind panic, heart pounding out of my chest. Then, out of nowhere, I burst out of the edge of the maze and was standing on the gravel lot. I could still hear crashing through the stalks, but when I looked back, he must have gotten turned around because he sounded further away. Then, like a gift from the universe, serendipity or whatever you want to call it, stuff like this happens to me all the time. Headlights passed across the lot and a police cruiser was pulling in. No siren, no blue lights, just creeping in like they were patrolling. I ran directly toward them, waving my arms around like a lunatic. They didn't even see me at first and almost left before I could get their attention. But I waved them down and explained that someone was in the maze and that I thought they might be dangerous. The officers got out, calmed me down, and then called it in. A couple other units rolled up within minutes. One of the cops stayed with me while the others went into the maze with their flashlights. That's when the officer told me there had been a legit escape earlier in the day from the prison just a few miles away. He said they'd been in the general area all night trying to keep it quiet while they searched because someone had called in that they saw someone matching the description trespassing on their property. He said the guy was dangerous and that they suspected he might head toward places he could hide, like barns, woods, or in this case, the cornfield. I have no doubt I reeked like weed, but the cop didn't care. My mind was completely blown at the realization that I had just walked right up to this guy like an idiot thinking it was kids screwing around. The cops eventually caught him, though not in the maze. He had bolted out the back side and tried cutting over through another field, but they had dogs on him and got him down before he made it to the tree line. It was the craziest thing I've ever experienced, hands down. Every time I picture it, I can see him crouching there in the flashlight beam, his eyes looking right at me like he would do anything to keep from getting caught. I've only shared this story a couple of times outside of my immediate circle because it makes me feel stupid when I think about how close I came to something really bad happening. It happened about 10 years ago when I was working nights at a diner outside of town. I lived out on the other side of the swamp at that point, so the fastest way home was the back road that cut through it. If you've ever lived in a small town like mine, you know the type of road I'm talking about. No lights, no houses, just dirt, trees, water, and fog. I'd just gotten off a double, horribly tired, maybe 1 a.m. I was driving slow because there were these patches of fog rolling across the road. And when I'm that tired, I almost feel like I'm actually drunk. When I came around one of the sharper bends near this old wooden bridge, my headlights lit up something that made my stomach jump. There was a girl standing right on the bridge. Barefoot, jeans, t-shirt, hair sticking to her face like she'd been sweating. She was waving her arms, like begging me to stop. The one reference I always give people when I try to describe what she looked like was the woman at the end of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I slowed down without even thinking because my first thought was car accident or maybe she'd been attacked or something. I pulled up and she didn't even wait for me to ask if she was okay. She yanked the passenger door open, slid in, and just started telling me to drive, to just go. I tried to ask her what was going on, but she just kept looking behind us like someone was going to come out of the trees or something. She said something about people chasing her. some guys from a camp in the swamp. But when I asked for more information, she wouldn't explain what she meant. I kept asking who was after her and where she needed to go, and she just kept freaking out and jumping in the seat saying, "Keep going, I'll tell you where." I should have turned around right then and there, but she was young, maybe 20s, and looked like she'd been through something bad, and my adrenaline was dumping and I just was not thinking. I felt guilty at the thought of dropping her back off in the middle of nowhere, so I just kept going. Finally, she started telling me where to go, but the direction she gave me didn't make any sense. She'd say, "Turn left up here," and it was just another dirt road that would lead us deeper into the swamp instead of going in the direction of town. I grew up around there, and I knew these roads didn't lead anywhere except hunting camps and fishing shacks. I started to realize she wasn't taking me to a house or town. She was leading me further away from everything and just assuming that I didn't know the area. It was like, "Take this turn. Oh, now turn here," like she was just winging it. She was super jittery too, kept bouncing her leg, biting at her nails and glancing at me, then out of the window. Every time I asked where exactly we were going, her story changed. First she said it was her aunt's place. Then she said her boyfriend's trailer. Then she said she just needed to get out of there before they found her. I knew then that something wasn't adding up. The longer I drove, the more this tight feeling built in my chest. I remember thinking, if she tells me to turn down one more frickin' dead-end dirt road, I'm done. And sure enough, at the next crossroads, she told me to turn left for the third time in a row. I pulled over instead. She snapped her head toward me, eyes wide like she couldn't believe I had stopped. I told her she needed to get out. She flipped instantly, started slapping the dash with both hands, yelling at me to drive. She screamed that I didn't understand, that I was leaving her to die. Then she turned on me, started cussing me out, calling me a bitch, hitting the inside of the door like she was trying to break it off the hinge. I carry a pistol in my console. I didn't point it at her, but I put my hand on it and told her I was armed and that if she didn't get out, I was either going to call the cops or defend myself. She stiffened up for a second, seemed to take in what I was saying, then shoved the door open and stormed off into the fog. I just sat there, shaking like a leaf, watching her disappear down the road in the direction she'd wanted me to go. I didn't hang around. I turned the car around and drove the long way home. My hands were sweating when I pulled into my driveway. For days after, I kept thinking I'd see her face on the news, like maybe she really was running from someone and I had just abandoned her out there. But a week later, I heard through a buddy who's a deputy that there'd been reports of setups on those swamp back roads. A driver would stop for somebody stranded, then a group would come out of the trees and rob them. In one case, the driver got beat up so bad he ended up in the hospital. The description of the lure matched almost exactly, a barefoot girl flagging down cars. That's when it hit me. I have no idea if she was working with people or if she was just unstable or something. It embarrasses me to admit how easily I could have been one of those drivers who got lured deeper into the swamp. I still don't know what her deal was, but I know pulling over that night was one of the dumbest and luckiest things I've ever done. I don't take that road home anymore. Even during the day, I won't ever cross that bridge again. When I was growing up, my family lived in a small town where nothing much ever really went on. It was mostly a farming town. Obviously, I'm older now, and my parents have long since moved away. When I was younger, though, sometimes I would babysit for this family that lived a little further out toward the edge of town. They had 2 kids at the time. One was like 7 and the other one was 5. Their parents had gone out of town for the weekend and hired me to look after them. I'd watched them a bunch before, so it wasn't anything new. The family weren't like hardcore farmers, but they had a small operation where they sold some produce to like farmers markets and local stores and stuff. It was a nice little modern farmhouse, and there was a little patch of field out back, a shed with some equipment, a scarecrow and some sprinklers, and that was basically it. It was a pretty minor enterprise, and they'd been doing it as long as I'd known them, but that was the layout. Anyway, my parents dropped me off for the weekend after school, and I settled in with the kids. The weekend started fine. The kids were easy. We watched movies, made mac and cheese, the usual stuff. Looking back though, there were little things I should have paid more attention to when they started happening. But when you're staying at someone else's house, it can be hard to have a sense of what is routine and what isn't. For instance, the first morning I was there, I looked out the back window and saw these boot prints in the frost in the backyard. They came from the direction of the shed on the edge of the field. I dismissed them as maybe from the dad the day before or something. Sometimes that can happen with frost. You'll see imprints that are older and they don't fill in as much or look as dark. But these look newer, like fresh. They led right up toward the back door and then just kind of stopped. Regrettably, I didn't make much of it, but it did stick with me because the dad always parked in front and then went in through the garage, not the back. And it just didn't make much sense to go back there unless you were heading out into the field or to the shed. Later, when the kids went down for a nap, I sat on the little back deck for a while. They were these old school kind of deck chairs some of you may remember that had these like vinyl bands for the seat. One detail about them though was that if you sat in them for a while, when you got up, the vinyl would stay stretched and sag even after you left until it had time to return to its original form. As I was sitting there, I noticed that the other chair had that exact kind of sag to it, like someone had been sitting there recently. Obviously, over time, the seats lose their shape, so I wasn't sure if it was just old or used more or something. But the chair that I was sitting in was totally fine, so it stood out to me. Finally, later in the afternoon, I was upstairs folding laundry. I had to wash some things after one of the kids puked on himself after playing too hard after lunch. That's when I looked out one of the bedroom windows that faced the field and saw that the scarecrow just looked different. I don't even know how to describe it really. It was just off, like newer or something. The jeans looked darker, not all faded like I'd remembered them. And it seemed taller somehow, like straighter. I need to mention I wasn't like hyper-focused on this thing, and the family had had this in their back field as long as I had known them, so I had never really paid it much mind. I may have glanced at it the first time I babysat there, but I honestly don't know that I ever really even looked directly at it, and if I had, it had been at least a year or so beforehand. All of this is to say that in my mind, I couldn't tell whether I was just seeing something for the first time in a long time, or if it was actually different, and that's why I noticed it. So I thought it was weird, but I just kind of moved on and finished the laundry. But that evening, around dinner, I looked again. The kids were eating at the table, and I could see the scarecrow through the sliding glass door. I swear it had shifted a little, like it wasn't in the same pose as before. I was unsettled, but I didn't want to scare the kids, and also couldn't be sure that what I was seeing was even accurate. It was a totally different angle from the bedroom, and I honestly couldn't be 100% sure that I wasn't just making it up. At that point, I was fixated on it though. I put the kids in their pajamas and got them settled in. I usually put the kids to bed pretty early, even though there was still some light in the sky. Then I put on my shoes and decided to walk out there. I thought maybe I'd see something that would make it all make sense, or just alleviate the growing sense of anxiety that I felt. I started walking up the path alongside the field. As I got closer and past the shed, I happened to turn to my right and look along the side of the structure. At first, I didn't understand what I was even looking at. It just looked like a pile of straw and pieces of faded clothing. That's when I realized what was going on and stopped dead in my tracks. Lying on the ground behind the shed were the straw insides of the actual scarecrow and some of its clothing. I remember slowly turning around to look into the field and catching the scarecrow there, making the tiniest flinch like it had been watching me from the corner of its eye. I could feel a panic attack start rising up inside my gut and chest. Someone had taken down the old scarecrow, put on some of its clothing, and climbed up on the post, pretending to be it. I just stood there, staring at it, unsure what to do. Then, it looked at me. Whoever it was knew I had figured it out. And as soon as that clicked, they started climbing down off the post. I ran. I just turned and sprinted back toward the house. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. The kids started crying because they saw how freaked out I was. I locked us all in the upstairs master bedroom and told them to stay quiet, then grabbed the phone and called the parents, who in turn called the police. While I was on the phone with the parents, I was looking out the bedroom window but couldn't see the person anywhere. The police came and searched the field and property, but found nothing except for the old scarecrow discarded behind the shed where I told them I had seen it. They also found some food items and a soda can out by the scarecrow post. The parents ended up traveling home early, while another relative came to stay with the kids until they got home. Obviously, this was a big story in my community, but nobody ever got caught for it. Weeks later, there were rumors going around about who it might have been. There was this kid from my high school who got caught on someone else's property, a family who also had a daughter around the same age as me. I guess when he got caught, he just said that he liked her and wanted to watch her from the backyard. He was a weird kid and came from a pretty rough home, but there's no way to know if it was the same person, though I'm inclined to believe it was. Every time I babysat after that, I triple-checked all the doors and windows and never went outside unless I absolutely had to. I just remember being so scared, knowing he was standing out there the whole time, dressed up like something I'd seen dozens of times and never thought twice about. This story is the reason I will never trust another stranger, ever again. I'm no longer homeless, but there were a couple solid years there where I really settled into being the worst version of myself. I couldn't see it at the time, but I had been making shitty choices and gradually but consistently alienating everyone in my life, and eventually it landed me on the street. That more or less paved the way for probably the most horrific experience of my life. During that period, I spent a lot of time at the library because it was warm, quiet, and I could use the internet. The library was kind of like a safe zone. Outdoors at night, it always felt like the Wild West, but during the day, I could at least find some semblance of comfort in there. Nobody really bothered me. Usually, people avoided me altogether. I got looks sometimes, but mostly people just ignored me, and I was fine with that. So this one day I was pretty hungover, just kind of getting through it, and this guy sits down near me. That didn't ever happen. Most folks kept at least a seat or two away. This guy didn't. Just sat down right next to me. When you're in the position that I was and something like this happens, the only assumption you can make is that either this guy is homeless too, or he's a weirdo or something. But he was totally normal, middle-aged, clean clothes, and looked like he worked some kind of office job. Not overdressed, just neat, clean, and smelled good. He was super nice to me in what felt like an authentic way, and started talking about the weather, then asked me if the internet there was decent. Just regular small talk. The only conclusion I could draw was that he was just one of those people who likes to chat and isn't afraid of other people, especially ones who looked like I did. He asked me if I came to the library often, if I lived nearby, what life on the street was like, and if I had any family. I was cautious, but at the same time, it felt strange having someone actually interested in me. It felt good. People don't usually do that. They either treat me like I'm invisible or they look at me like I'm a problem. Eventually, he explained that he was a counselor, which sort of helped all the pieces to fall into place for me. Over the next week or so, he kept showing up, always super friendly. He brought me coffee once and offered me food another time. He said I reminded him of his brother who went through a rough patch. Then he asked me where I stayed at night. I kind of brushed it off, but he kept circling back to it. Finally, he said he had a garage at his place and I could use it if I needed somewhere warm to sleep until I could get back on my feet. There was a couch in there, blankets, and it was private and safe. This was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for me. I wanted to say no. I don't like asking people for things or admitting that I need help, but I'd been freezing at night and just felt worn down. And just that general sense of danger that leads you to sleepless night after sleepless night. I told him I didn't want to be a burden and that I'd just go for one night to catch up on my rest, nothing more. He said he completely understood and that it was no problem. By that point, it was night. The library closed and I began to follow him. At first, it felt fine, but after a while, I felt like we had walked farther than I expected based on what he had described about where he lived. Not into a neighborhood, but down towards some older industrial buildings. He told me it was a shortcut, but I started getting this bad feeling. And he also wasn't talking as much as he had done in the library either. His voice was just different, flat, like he had been trying to make an impression in there or something. He walked ahead of me, and I followed. We finally stopped by what looked like an old storage shed behind one of the buildings. He told me the garage was through there and pointed. I looked in the direction he indicated, but it didn't look like anybody lived nearby at all. The whole street was dead and quiet. That's when he turned on me. Out of nowhere, he shoved me against the wall. Before I could even get my head around what was happening, he swung at me and caught me in the face. My head slammed into the side of the shed, which caused me to stumble backwards and hunch over. That's when he got both arms around me and put all his weight into getting me on the ground. He had all this energy all of a sudden, like it excited him, and was raging under his breath in this vicious tone. Then he was just beating me, punch after punch. I was panicking. My adrenaline surged and I fought back as best I could, kicking and shoving and rolling. And I don't know how I managed it, but I slipped out from under him and was able to get to my feet and run as fast as I could, bleeding from my nose, dizzy and scared out of my mind. I heard him yell after me that I was a piece of shit and that he would find me again. And then I could hear him dumping out my things on the ground and kicking them around. I found a cop car parked like 4 blocks away and begged them to help me. I told them some guy had jumped me. The cop looked me up and down and asked if I'd been drinking. He asked if I was on something. I wasn't. I tried to explain everything, but he cut me off and told me to calm down, that they couldn't file a report without more details. He basically just brushed me off, said I should go to a shelter if I didn't feel safe on the street. That was it. No report, no checking the area, nothing. I realized right then and there that no one was going to take me seriously. Not in my position. To them, I was just another crazy homeless guy rambling about nonsense. Meanwhile, that man is still out there. He very well could have killed me that night, and no one may have known or even cared. He could be looking for somebody else right now, maybe some other guy like me who's desperate for a warm place to sleep. I've gotten myself together since then, but I will never trust another stranger again, no matter how far away I get from that life on the street. I work at a library, and this happened a couple winters ago. It's one of those things that sticks with me because of what could have happened if things went just a little differently. I was working one afternoon. My memory of it was that the whole day just kind of felt dark and dreary and gray. The library had been dead quiet, maybe a handful of people inside. This is in a lesser populated area, and our library never gets packed or anything, but this was a particularly dead day. Just to give you a sense of the vibe, I think most libraries can feel a little haunted at times, but it's a bit different in the big ones that I've been in compared to how ours feels. In a large one, there's so much space it almost feels like you're in some kind of echoey cave or something. But in ours, it's so small that the carpet soaks up all the sound and it feels very isolating and eerie in a very unique way. Like every stack you pass, there could be someone hiding behind it who you had no idea was even there. Also, at that time of the year, it gets all fogged up and wet on the windows, so it always feels a bit like you're trapped in some kind of Arctic post or something. It just adds to the isolation and claustrophobia. Anyway, so I'm at the desk when this parent comes up to me, looking uneasy. They had one of the popular picture books their kid liked, and they said they found something in it while reading. They didn't know what to do, but they thought I should see it, and they handed the book to me, open to a certain page. I took the book and turned it toward me, and tucked between 2 pages was this folded piece of paper. The handwriting looked childish at a first glance, but once I really looked at it, it felt more like it was done on purpose, like someone trying hard to look like a kid wrote it. It read, "Hello, little adventurer. This is our secret. Come outside and meet the book fairies in the special parking lot. We'll show you something magical." I remember I had been a little fried that day from something else I had going on in my life at the time, so it really took me a moment to absorb the impact of this and how jarring it was. I tried to play it cool because the parent's kid was right there, but the parent looked horrified. I told them I'd take care of it, logged the incident, and then thanked them for bringing it up. After they left, I checked the return system. The book had been returned that morning via the return chute. Now our library is small enough that we're usually able to quickly check each book upon return, just to make sure none of the pages are torn and they look in decent shape. But this day had been so slow, I remember just scanning the few returns we had and throwing them back on the shelf without really digging into them. It wasn't my finest moment, and if I had done my job properly, this whole situation might have been avoided. Anyway, I saw that it wasn't checked out for long, but under an account that had been created recently under the name Jane Doe. We require a name and an address when we create an account, but it's not airtight because our library is pretty laid back and in a more rural area, so we're not hyper-vigilant about the rules. But now that I was looking at the account, the name stood out to me as suspicious. I left the desk and went to check the shelf myself. I thought maybe there'd be something else tucked away, or even the person who planted it hanging around. I went over to the children's section. It's always kind of claustrophobic there with all the short rows of shelves close together, and it was dead silent except for my own muffled steps on the carpet. I went through the aisle where the book belonged, checked the nearby shelves, and pulled a couple random books just to look inside. There was nothing, but it still didn't feel right. I kept replaying the wording of the note in my head about going outside to the parking lot. I should have just reported it and left it at that, but instead, I decided to take a quick look outside. My thinking was, if there was somebody actually out there waiting, I'd know for sure, and then I could call the cops. So I went out the side door near the back. It was freezing. I made my way around the side of the building to the back, crunching through the slush. Behind the building, there were no windows, just a wide dirt parking lot that extended toward a tree line way on the other end. I scanned through the back lot, and at first I didn't see anything. But then, I noticed a car parked off by itself near the far end, engine running with the lights off. The windows were cracked just barely, and I could see two people's silhouettes sitting inside. One of them was leaning forward, like they were straining to see. I could see two lit cigarette cherries glowing inside in the darkness. Then, it clicked in my head. They weren't just sitting there. They were waiting for a kid. They had written the note. I slowly backed away. Then as soon as I got enough distance, I bolted back inside, locked the door behind me, and called the police. By the time they came, whoever it was had slipped off. The officers looked around but didn't find anyone. They didn't seem all that surprised either, which somehow made it worse. Like maybe this kind of thing happens more often than anyone talks about. I gave them the information from the account, but it was either fake or stolen according to the police. It just bothers me so much and I feel so guilty. If I had been paying more attention, it's possible I could have done something sooner and maybe even gotten them caught. Thank God that parent happened to be the one who found the note. The idea that they used one of our books to try and lure a child makes me sick. Every time I shelve in the children's section now, I can't help but think about it. I even find myself compulsively checking random books just to make sure there's nothing stuffed inside of them. I keep wondering if they'll try again here or at a different library somewhere else. And what happens if the next time there isn't a parent there to notice the note first? Or if the kid is old enough to wander off without telling anyone. So this was years back when I was in grad school. It was honestly one of the scariest things I've ever gone through. I was basically living in the library at the time. Not literally, but I was there every single day without exception because I couldn't focus at my apartment due to my living arrangement with the roommate I had. It was a huge public library in the city with multiple floors and large open spaces and aisle upon aisle of books. I'd get there super early in the day, bring a lunch, and stay late into the evening most nights. During finals, it got so bad they had to ask me to leave multiple times because I'd been so engrossed in what I was doing that I hadn't even realized the time had slipped past closing. I barely saw daylight for weeks. In the end, it was all worth it to have the career I have now, but God, I hated that part of my life. The library was a little boring and depressing when it was quiet, but it was a space that felt safe and peaceful. At least that's what I thought before this happened. So this one afternoon, I'd been sitting in the same chair for hours, working through notes. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't moved much, and I finally decided to get up and go use the bathroom. At that library, the bathrooms were on the basement level. Fluorescent lights, echoey tiles, heavy stall doors, and just the fan noise. Everything got super quiet down there. That day, it was empty when I went in, which I didn't think twice about. I went into a stall, locked it, and was just zoning out. A couple minutes later, I heard the main door creak open, which is normal, people come and go. But what wasn't normal was that nothing followed. No footsteps to a stall or sink. It was like someone had come into the bathroom and just stood by the door after it closed behind them. For a second, I thought maybe it was the janitor coming in to check if anyone was in there so they could clean. Or maybe somebody who preferred more privacy and was just getting the lay of the land. But in either case, the person didn't leave. The door had opened, they walked in, stopped, and the door closed. Nothing else. It was painfully awkward and I didn't know what to do, so I just called out asking if someone was there. I waited, thinking I'd hear someone acknowledge me back or react, but there was nothing, just silence. Then, out of nowhere, I hear this noise. It was like a quiet, high-pitched mumble or something, barely audible enough to hear, but not loud enough that I could make out what they were saying. I don't even know if they were saying real words, like squeaking and then giggling. It was like someone trying to imitate a little kid. I didn't know if I was being screwed with or if I just didn't have the necessary context to make sense of it, but it was genuinely terrifying. I said something I don't remember, like hello, without even thinking, and the noise just stopped for a second. Then it started again, louder, and then footsteps moving toward me. They walked right up to the stall door. I could hear little squeals and broken words, like a fake baby voice. I can't even explain how creepy it sounded. It didn't feel playful at all. It felt 100% purposeful. Then I saw the little turn dial lock on my stall door start moving. Someone was testing it. I jumped to my feet, pulled my pants up and yelled that someone was in here, instinctively backing up as far as I could from the stall door. That feeling of having my back to the tile wall with nowhere else to go, just looking at the stall door as whoever was on the other side was yanking to get it open, to this day gives me chills. The noises they were making got louder and they started punching the door and reaching their hand over to yank it from the top. This wasn't someone messing around. They were violently trying to get in. I started screaming for help. Over everything else that was going on, my voice sounded like it barely carried, which gave me this incredibly doomed and hopeless feeling. Whoever it was slamming against the door now, making these horrible shrieks, like if you've ever heard coyotes attack something in the woods. I was screaming at the top of my lungs, back pressed against the tile wall. Then, suddenly, there was another sound. The bathroom door creaked open, and I heard a man's voice shouting something. In the same instant, the other noises stopped. The banging stopped. Then there was a commotion and yelling. Whoever was at my stall started running away. I heard the rush of footsteps, then the main door slamming open and shut again. I just stood there, but heard the janitor come back in asking what was going on. I couldn't even talk. I was shaking, crying, trying to get my pants buttoned up and open the stall. The janitor kept asking me if I was okay, and I just nodded, but inside I was completely wrecked. I guess he had chased them, but they had been able to outrun him. He said he couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. We reported it, but no one cared. Between the janitor and I, we couldn't even give much of a description. All I had was the sound of those fake baby noises in my head. I couldn't focus for weeks after that, and I avoided the bathroom completely. If I absolutely had to go in there, I made sure there were other people around. Eventually, I stopped going to the library altogether. I know I'm not doing the best job capturing the feeling down there, but it was so disturbing. Like it wasn't just someone being weird. It felt dangerous. The way they tried to break in, the way they came in silently at first and listened, then the noises. I had no idea what they wanted, but they weren't just messing around. They wanted me alone. They wanted me trapped. If the janitor hadn't walked in at that exact moment, I honestly don't know what would have happened. And the worst part is, nobody ever caught them. I still don't know who it was. Nobody does. Every time I lock myself into a stall, I feel that panic all over again. I'm a bit older than most others I see posting here, so I may be a little out of touch with what people find scary nowadays. But when this happened to me, the fear I felt was so disturbing and intense, it left an imprint on me that has lasted my entire life. I'm in my 70s now. This happened when I was a kid, maybe middle school or so. It's not something I find myself talking about a whole lot, but every now and then I'll think about it. Usually when I see something on TV about carnivals or when I catch a certain smell that reminds me of it. This took place at a county carnival back in the early 60s in the Midwest where I grew up. Back then, those traveling fairs were a big deal. They were the highlight of the summer, and everyone from the surrounding towns would go. They had the rides, the food stands, games where you'd never win anything, and something you no longer see at them, a freak show. That's what they called it back then. The world kind of outgrew them for obvious reasons, but back then they were a staple at most carnivals. Grotesque painted banners outside showing things like the bearded lady, the strong man, the two-headed cow, oddities. Even as kids, we knew it was fake, just tricks to pull in money, but we loved it regardless. Something about the dark theatricality of it all. But this particular year, we were so convinced that what we had seen was real that my friend and I couldn't let it go. This particular carnival had a freak show feature called The Lizard Boy. There had been rumors circulating about how real it was even before the carnival arrived in town. So we went. Our parents had taken a group of us kids, and when we finally got there, even they seemed to be unnerved by it. We were all allowed to look through this glass window, which had been sort of frosted over, so it was tough to really see clearly. But you could tell that there was a figure inside, set back a bit, that truly looked and moved like both a lizard and a person. From what we could see, it was sitting in a cage on a bunch of sawdust, messing on himself, watching back at the people through the viewing window and licking his lips. Again, it was a little hard to see, but it didn't feel like an act. It felt weird and shocking and gross. That same night, I had gone back to my buddy's house after leaving the carnival. He lived nearby. Once we knew his parents had gone to bed, we got a flashlight, left his house, walked down the road, and snuck back into the carnival grounds after it had closed for the night. It wasn't hard back then. No fences, no cameras. For a visual, the rides were all shut down, lights dimmed, and the place was littered with popcorn bags and cups and torn tickets. All the crap that people cover up when the place is packed. Like all the fun has been sucked out, and all that's left over is this vacuum of garbage and eerie silence. It's just kind of creepy. So we sneak around the perimeter, zigzagging through the rides, food stands, and games and all that, keeping in the shadows, trying to avoid any staff that might be out milling around for whatever reason. Back then, they would just have guys sit out there all night with a baseball bat, since there wasn't the security technology yet. And if they caught you, you'd get your ass beat. It was as simple as that. We didn't see anybody waiting out though. Eventually, we made it to the freak show tent and felt our way along the back of the canvas until we found an opening big enough to get through. Inside, the tent was basically pitch dark except for a couple hanging gas lanterns. I remember crouching there with my friend near the opening, just listening to make sure nobody was within earshot. And then we began crouch walking through the space, him behind me. He turned on the flashlight and started moving it around. From what it looked like, we assumed we were in the backstage area. And as predicted, what we could see revealed that most of it had clearly been fake. A lot of wooden, plastic, and rubber props leaning against pallets and mobile walls, or stored in crates. It looked like they had a bunch of different stuff we hadn't even seen that day. Like they brought out different features depending on the town they were in or what day it was. We got to the edge of this wooden pen area, and that's when I saw the cage. You could tell it was the same cage because it had a sign fixed on top of it that read, "Beware the Lizard Boy." But the cage had been moved from where it was earlier in the day and pushed back next to a lantern in the corner of the pen. You couldn't really see inside it because the only light on it was from the lantern sitting next to it. You could see some of the bars on the side of the cage as well as the sign, but that was it. Then I heard something shift inside it. When it happened, you could see a little bit of straw at the bottom of the cage move between the bars. Something was still inside. I leaned back and whispered for my friend to turn off his light. He did, and then I moved so he could lean over me and look. I don't know what his deal was, but he was in my ear telling me that he couldn't see anything, and then the idiot, with zero notice, turns the flashlight back on and shines it directly on the cage. And then we saw him. He was sitting cross-legged inside the cage like a regular kid, covered in green paint that was all smeared and smudged like it had been rubbed around. He was also, and to this day it upsets me to repeat this detail, but he was covered in his own crap and pee. He had the same ripped shirt from earlier, and it looked like there were clumps of fake fur glued to his arms or something. It was not natural at all. He was slumped forward, not moving, and you could see him drooling on himself. My friend and I were just crouched there, leaning on each other in total shock. Then, the kid must have either opened his eyes or seen the light through his eyelids or something because he lifted his head up. It was super slow, like it took a lot of effort, and his mouth hung open, and you could see drool hanging off his chin. His eyes looked glassy and unfocused, and he started rocking back and forth. It was so fucked up. It was obvious right away that something was up with him, and I'm trying to be delicate about how I'm saying it. But in retrospect, years later, it's pretty clear he was like developmentally delayed or disabled or something, and someone had painted him up to use him as a carnival feature. He wasn't pretending, and he wasn't acting, and I don't know to what degree he was even aware of what was happening. Neither of us knew whether to get out of there or talk to him or what. It was like being hypnotized. Then, I think because he saw our flashlight, he started kind of like hopping up and down and banging into the bars on the cage. My friend immediately covered the flashlight with his palm, and that's when the tent flap opened to the next room. This guy walks in carrying a lantern in one hand and what looked like a dog bowl in the other. Walks directly over to the cage and says, and I quote, "Relax, dummy," then sets the bowl down on the ground just outside the cage and opens its door. The kid was like wigging out and kept gesturing in our direction without words and wouldn't come out of the cage. That's when the guy lifted his lantern, turned and saw us for the first time, which clearly took him by surprise. We didn't even react because it was so obvious we had been seen. This guy's entire reaction was to just look at us. He didn't say anything. He just took in that we were there for like a full 5 seconds and then nodded toward the exit. That was it. We stood up, mumbled that we were sorry, and walked out of the nearest flap. Then we ran. To our knowledge, the guy never followed us out or called after us or anything. He just let us go. I didn't tell my parents, but my friend told his, and their only reaction was to ground him. Like they didn't give a shit about what we told them we saw. They only cared that we had left the house without their permission. Other than that, we kept it to ourselves and a few friends. Part of it was not even knowing how to really explain what we saw. Like, was the kid that guy's son? Or some disabled kid that got picked up along the way in some town somewhere and wasn't with it enough to resist or really know the difference? What I do know is that it was 100% a real person. A kid locked in a cage, covered in green paint and crap, with fake fur glued all over him, living out his life in a cage like an animal. This scared the hell out of me at the time. I was 17 or 18 when it happened. My parents showed me these auditions they found in the paper for a magician who would be at the autumn fair and who was looking for an assistant to be in the shows for the duration of the carnival. He was a local magician who did this every year, and a lot of the girls from my school and nearby towns planned on auditioning. He was the same older magician we had grown up seeing when we had gone to the fair as kids, and he always hired someone local to the area to be his assistant. He did all the usual tricks, sawing someone in half, the escape tank, making people disappear. Even though it sounds silly now, a lot of us girls who had been involved in the theater at school wanted the opportunity to put it on our resumes or college applications. And compared to another part-time job, the idea of dressing up, getting on stage, and being the assistant sounded glamorous. So I decided to go. On the day of the audition, a bunch of other girls showed up too, maybe 20. Some I knew, most I didn't. A lot looked older, maybe early 20s, and way more confident than me. They came in with nice clothes and perfect hair like they'd been preparing for this. Right away, I felt out of place, like I had no business being there. We were all waiting in this cramped area behind the magician's tent, basically in a trailer storage space. A few of the girls talked to each other, but mostly I stayed quiet. There was one girl who stood out though. I didn't know her and she wasn't friendly at all. Not openly mean, just these passive-aggressive little digs. Like at one point I said that I was nervous, and she chimed in saying something to the effect of, "Don't worry, he's not going to pick someone with zero experience like you," and gave this fake smile. Then she turned and laughed privately with another girl. It was true that I didn't have any experience as an assistant, but almost no one there did. And I was a pretty competent theater kid and had the look of his prior assistant, so I felt like I at least had a shot. It's hard to explain, but the whole time we were waiting, she kept glancing at me in this way that made me anxious. I couldn't tell if it was just because I was very nervous and self-conscious because of the circumstances, but it felt like she was watching me the entire time we were in the waiting area. The magician came in and out while he set up. Honestly, he seemed like he just wanted to get it over with. When the first girl went in, he barely looked at her, just opened the door, waved her out toward the audition area, and closed the door on the rest of us. Then, she came back, opened the door, and picked another one of us to go in after her. And that's how it went. One would go in, audition, come back, and send in another. Finally, the girl with the chip on her shoulder and I were the only ones who hadn't gone yet. She got called out to do her audition, and when she came back, she pointed at me to go next. I was the last one to audition. I was so nervous. I'd done plenty of auditions at schools, but this felt different. It wasn't about a character or lines, it was me in front of him trying not to screw up. I walked into the room and the magician told me we'd try the sawing box. He was very nice about it and said it was simple and to just climb in and stay still and get comfortable. Essentially, the way his trick was set up, it was all done with the legs as the only thing visible. The rest of you was completely closed in the box. The second I got into the box to lay down, I felt something wrong. The padding that lined the inside wasn't all there. I could feel bare wood and the sharp end of something pressing against my neck and shoulder where my spine met my head. I didn't know what it was, but when I let more of my weight rest on it, even slightly, it felt like it was going to pierce into me. It felt metal and hard, like the point of a screw or nail or staple or something. During this, the magician had been talking me through the trick. My mind was going back and forth between whether this was the intended way it should be and if I was just off in my positioning or if something was actually wrong, which didn't make any logical sense if everyone who had gone before me hadn't had an issue. I was barely paying attention to what he was saying when he started lowering the lid and told me to lay my head back all the way, and I could feel the pressure change as it came down on me. I could tell just by how the object felt that there was zero give, and if he fully closed the box, it was going to push my neck and head directly into whatever it was. And exactly as I predicted, that's what happened. The lid came into contact with my head as he was trying to close it, and it began to push my neck into whatever was sticking out inside the box. I immediately started panicking and yelling for him to take the lid back off, but he didn't listen. I could hear him saying through the wood that everything was fine and it was going to be okay and to just relax. That's when I started banging on the wood, kicking and screaming for him to let me out. He immediately opened it back up. I scrambled out and I was shaking. I tried to explain that something sharp was inside and that it wasn't safe, but I could tell he just wasn't having it. From his perspective, it just looked like I had freaked out when I had been put inside the box because I was claustrophobic or something. He had just auditioned 15 to 20 girls who had had no issues in there whatsoever. He wasn't a jerk about it necessarily, but he brushed me off right away, saying those props were old and rough and it wasn't the show box, and that beginners always overreact the first time. Then he waved for me to go without even looking into the box. My hands were trembling. I stood there feeling so stupid. He didn't care, and I felt humiliated like it was me and that I had been the problem and I was unprofessional. I was upset and just rushed back to the holding area to gather my things, and when I did, I caught the other girl's face, the one who had been a smartass to me. She was leaning against the wall with this little smirk, not even trying to hide it, like she'd gotten what she wanted. I left immediately. I didn't even wait to see who got picked. I just left. I found out later from another girl that at the very end of the auditions, after I'd left, the magician noticed the headrest had been ripped out and made a comment about it. There was talk that someone had yanked it off on purpose, which all of them denied, but to me was obviously the girl who had gone before me. Nobody else had complained about any pain in there, 15 to 20 girls in a row, and then she goes in, and all of a sudden it was my turn, and I felt like I was getting stabbed in the neck. That rumor stuck with me. I couldn't stop imagining that girl in there right before me, going out of her way to pull it off on purpose, leaving me exposed to whatever nails or staples were underneath. If I'd shifted wrong, or if he'd pushed the lid down harder, I don't want to think about how bad it could have gotten. Like, how messed up do you have to be as a person to go through life like that? I can only imagine what that woman is doing now as a grown adult, and I say a prayer for anyone who crosses her path. I worked for my uncle for a few years when I was still living at home during college summer breaks, like assisting his landscaping company and helping out on a couple construction site cleanups. But he also owned a property he would rent out to the carnivals that would come through the area, and I ended up working for those probably 3 summers in a row. Working at a carnival kind of ruins the whole experience, to be honest. The way I would describe it is like, you know that point when you're at a fair or carnival or something and you just hit a wall and you're like, yeah, I'm over this. It's basically that, all day long until you close. The summer this happened, I got put at the ticket booth outside the fun house. For the most part, you just sit there for hours, tearing tickets, getting sunburned, and hearing kids run around and scream. So this was late into the night, almost closing time on the last weekend of the carnival. The crowd was thinning out, families were leaving, and it had finally cooled down and gotten chilly after dark. I was chomping at the bit to close up and grab a beer with one of the other workers, so I was cleaning up the booth when this woman walked up to me. She had a group of friends or family behind her that she left behind to come talk to me. She looked strangely nervous, like she didn't really know what to do. She came up to me and kind of privately told me that one of the actors inside wearing a monster mask kept brushing up against people in the dark, touching them and following them around. She said she understood it was part of the show, but it felt like he was taking it too far, and that people inside were so uncomfortable with it that it became a topic of conversation and kind of ruined the whole thing for them, and that she just wanted to give the feedback for someone to know. Right away, red flags went up. There weren't supposed to be any live actors in that funhouse. It was all set dressing, machines, and lights. Now clearly she didn't know that, and I didn't want to send her into a full-blown panic, so I just thanked her for the information and told her I would handle it. There wasn't any real security there to tell. There were like a couple older people way on the other side of the carnival who I would have to track down in all the chaos and notify, and I would feel like an idiot pulling them away from whatever they were doing if this woman was mistaken or if it was some dumb person just pranking people. So I decided to deal with it myself and went in. Inside was dark, and immediately my nose filled with the chemicals they used in the haze machine. The rooms were all cheap horror setups, cackling skeletons on wires that dropped down when you stepped under them, rubber bats hanging from the ceiling, a plastic coffin with a zombie dummy that would spring forward when a sensor went off. All of it was campy and corny, but walking through there alone, late at night, it was definitely a different vibe. A couple minutes in, I thought I heard something up ahead of me. One of the sensors activated in the next room and I could hear it trigger a sound effect. I walked through the archway of the chamber I was in, and when I rounded the corner into the next room, I just stopped. At the far end of the room, under a strobe light, was what looked like a person dressed in dark clothes, wearing an old latex mask of either a clown or some kind of monster. They were just standing there in this awkward position, not moving, like they had noticed me at the same time I saw them and were trying to hide in a corner under some set dressing. They were so still and blended into the background so much that for a split second, I was like, is that part of the funhouse I'd somehow never noticed? But in my gut, I knew it wasn't. It was a person. Not that it would have made it any less uncomfortable, but I was pretty sure I could tell it was a guy just based on the physique. It was just me and him, and I'm not a big guy at all, but I felt like I had to project confidence or authority or something. So I yelled out to him that we were closed and he couldn't be back here. There was a pause. He said nothing, then pushed himself out of the corner and just slowly walked through the doorway into the next room. I should have turned around and gone back out the way I'd come in, but I didn't because now I felt responsible for making sure this guy got the hell out of there. So I followed him. In the next room, he was waiting again. Same thing. Standing at the other end, by the corner, half in the shadows, looking in my direction like he was waiting for me. I stepped into the room and was about to say something again when he just walks off through the next doorway. This happened over and over. Every room I went into, he was there, waiting at the other end. Sometimes at the end of a hallway, sometimes in a corner, sometimes standing in the middle of the room. He was obviously playing some kind of game with me, and at this point, I had already fallen for it. He had led me deliberately deeper into the funhouse. Finally, I followed him into one of the last rooms before the exit. I could tell because it was completely lit by black lights. This time, he didn't move when I stepped in. He stood there, planted dead center in the path. I remember the image of his mask glowing neon green because of all the black lights. At this point, I was pissed. I yelled at him at the top of my voice that I was done screwing around and that he needed to get the fuck out. I couldn't even see his eyes, just two dark holes in the mask staring back at me. Then, he lifted his arms in this bizarre gesture and started moving them around. It was like he was doing yoga or Tai Chi or something. It was so confusing and strange that I literally laughed out loud. And no sooner had that happen than he just started running dead toward me. No warning, no sound before it. He just came running toward me, arms lashing around, swiping at me. I was so unprepared for it that I stumbled backwards and smacked headfirst into the doorframe to the room. I didn't know it at the time, but it cut open the side of my forehead. I fell backwards into the previous room, got to my feet, and began running back through the funhouse. About halfway through, I pushed out through a side door emergency exit. Then I was back outside running until I was in the center of the fairground. At that point, I was done trying to deal with it myself and started yelling for help. A couple other workers came over and I told them what had happened. If it weren't for the blood gushing out of my forehead, I don't think they would have even taken me seriously. We turned off the music, put on the work lights, and all went back in and searched. Found nothing. He was gone. It's embarrassing to admit he got the best of me and made me look like an idiot. The fairground was still just busy enough that slipping into the crowd and getting out of there would have been easy. I got 7 stitches that night. I finished working the season through, but ended up tearing tickets at some rides for the rest of the carnival. It was by far my most terrifying carnival experience, and I have the scar to prove it. I've never actually written this story out, so forgive me if it's not as well put together as other experiences here, but I think those who can relate will understand how deeply terrifying it was. My son was about 15 at the time, so this was maybe 10 years ago. It was a weekend evening and he was out with his friends. I was home alone when I got a call from him. He was talking so fast I couldn't understand him at first. Once I calmed him down, he told me that he and a couple of his buddies had been messing around in some abandoned building out by the industrial park. He said there was a security guard who had caught them and locked them in some room, and that the guy told them that if they wanted to be let out, they needed to call their parents and have them come get them. My son sounded like he was on the verge of tears, which was not like him at all. At first, I thought maybe it was just some rent-a-cop who was scaring them to teach them a lesson, but the more he talked, the more off it sounded. Security guards don't lock people in rooms like hostages. That's not how that works. I told him to stay on the line while I got in my car. I drove straight over, which took maybe 15 minutes. The whole time, he kept saying, "Please hurry," that the guy was right outside, holding the door shut, banging on it, and piling things in front of it to block them in. When I pulled up, the building was completely dark. It was one of those old concrete factories they shut down years ago. No lights, no cars, just weeds growing through the cracks in the pavement. I parked right up near the main entrance, got my multi-tool out of the console, turned on my phone's flashlight, and got out. The front door was chained shut, and over speakerphone my son guided me around the side of the building to find the side entrance they had snuck through. The place stank like mold, and there was trash, shattered glass, and broken furniture everywhere. I've never understood the appeal of exploring places like this at all. It just seems like asking for trouble. I kept my son on the line while I made my way through the place. I could hear muffled banging on some door somewhere deeper in. It was disorienting to hear it coming through both the phone speaker and further inside the building, so I told him to keep banging on the door, but I was taking the phone off speaker so I could hear where it was coming from. The place echoed like crazy, but I did my best to follow the noise. I finally turned down the hallway the sound was coming from. Phone flashlights suck in general, but at the time of this story they were even worse, if you can imagine. I knew it was the right hallway because the sound they were making was so much louder and clearer than it had been. From the end of the hallway, I could see there were multiple doorways on either side extending further back into the darkness. At the reach of the phone light, there was what looked like one doorway that had a big metal file cabinet tipped across it. It sounded like my son and his friends were yelling from behind it. I called out down the hallway and heard them react and start banging harder on the door, but there was nothing from the security guard. He had left. I started walking toward the blocked doorway, crunching through all the debris scattered on the floor. When I reached the door, I could see that not only was the file cabinet tipped across it, but a rope of some kind had been tied around the door handle and tightly looped through the cabinet, making it impossible to open from the inside. I yelled through the door to the boys that I was there and then tried to move the cabinet. It barely gave at all. It was insanely heavy. I opened it up and saw it was packed with rocks and broken bricks. It didn't help that the rope was so tightly secured to the door handle that you couldn't get any leverage. I started fishing my multi-tool out of my pocket to cut through the rope when I heard something to my left. It sounded like someone stepping on glass deeper into the building. It was just for a second, like someone trying to be quiet. I held up my phone and pointed the light down the hallway. It was barely bright enough to see that the hallway intersected with another one further down, but everything was pitch dark beyond the access point. There was just silence except for the muffled voices of my son and his friends through the door. I called out, "Hello." Nothing, just dust floating through the phone light. Then, a voice came from around the corner at the end of the hallway in the dark. The person's voice was weird. It was male but didn't sound natural, like he was trying to do an impersonation or something. The circumstances were so bizarre, and I was so preoccupied with absorbing the impact of it all that I hadn't even had the presence of mind to understand what the person had actually said. I was completely still, just staring down the hallway into the dark, unsure what was even going on. Then, the voice came again, and this time I could understand what they were saying. "Leave money by the door and walk away." It all came together. There was no way in hell this was a security guard. This was some psycho trying to ransom a group of kids he had trapped in a room. I felt this wave of anger and was about to shout that I was calling the police when the voice repeated the phrase, louder, like he was getting pissed there had been no response yet. And then there was this loud bang from the darkness, like he had hit something against the wall as hard as he could. That's when I knew the situation was not just weird, it was dangerous. I yelled down the hall that I was calling the cops and to keep away from us. You could hear the guy start screaming from the darkness and beating on the wall around the corner. The amount of noise he was making was terrifying, and it echoed throughout the building. I sawed through the rope as fast as I could with the multi-tool. The boys opened the door, and together we all pushed the file cabinet over into the hallway. It took us a few tries, and during all of this, the psycho in the dark at the end of the hall was just screaming and violently hitting something into the wall. My son and his two buddies came pouring out, obviously traumatized. I shoved them behind me and told them to move. We ran down the other end of the hallway toward the exit with our phone lights. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but I could see nothing in all the chaos. We got outside and didn't stop until we were in the car. I locked the doors, called the cops, and drove straight out of there. I never heard back from them, and I have my doubts they did much of an investigation at all. The whole experience blew my mind. I forbade my son from ever exploring abandoned buildings like that again, but it didn't seem like he needed much convincing. That guy wasn't guarding anything. He was just trying to capitalize on some dumb kids wandering through. There's no way it had been something he just decided to do in the moment. Even if it hadn't worked, it was clear he had a plan. And if we hadn't gotten out of there when we did, I really don't know how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. This makes me feel sick every time I think about it. A year or two ago, before I moved away from home, me and a couple friends used to do a lot of dumb stuff like sneaking into abandoned places. We lived in an area that had a lot of rundown buildings, and this was during the time when urbex stuff became really popular. After this happened though, we never did it again. There was this old hospital out toward the edge of town that people would drive to and like party in and stuff. It had been closed for a really long time, like decades, and there were stories about it being haunted and stuff, but really it was just a wreck. Broken windows, holes everywhere, and random junk piled in the hallway that people had torn out of the rooms over the years. It was impressive that it was still standing at all. The day this happened, there were 4 of us. It was the last summer break before college started, I think, and someone had the idea to go check it out. My friend drove all of us, and we burned one down in the old lot when we got there. The building looked like a giant shell from the outside, all rusted metal and busted up brick. Getting in wasn't even hard. One of the side doors was completely ripped off. We had been there before at night, but never in the day, and with the extra light you could really see the whole place was rotting from the inside out. There were a bunch of stairwells. Most of them were pretty sketch, super rusted, but we decided to risk it and go upstairs. The second floor was concrete in some places, wood in others, and you could already tell some of it wasn't safe. There were holes all over the place. One of my friends, I'll call him Mike, went farther out onto a section that looked especially precarious. He walked out between two holes in the floor along what effectively looked like a plank, connecting two sections of floor, and told us to take his photo. Before anyone had time to, it happened so fast it didn't even seem real. The wood just gave out underneath him and he dropped. We all yelled, and then there was silence for like half a second before we heard him hit the floor below, and then another sound as that floor gave out from the impact, dropping him probably another 12 to 15 feet straight down into a basement level we didn't even know was there. The sound he made when he landed from the second drop was worse than the floor breaking. It wasn't like in the movies. It was this awful, almost wet thud and a yell that cut off into screaming. Then, silence. None of us still on the second floor even reacted for a second. Then, we cautiously made our way to the edge of the hole and looked down. You could see him twisted on the ground, 2 floors down, one of his legs bent completely the wrong way. We freaked out. One of my friends kept yelling that he was dead until Mike screamed again and tried to crawl away, but he couldn't move. Then, we started trying to figure out how to get to him. On the way down to the first floor, we could hear something strange. His tone shifted from screaming in pain to suddenly like yelling in fear. At first, we thought he was calling out and asking for us to get down there, but that's not what it was. He was yelling that someone was down in the basement with him. We got to the edge of the hole on the first floor and stopped. None of us had even known there was a basement, let alone how to get down there. All we could do was just look down at him. He looked completely vulnerable, just laying down there crippled, surrounded by darkness and waving his arms, shouting that someone was down there, moving around in the dark. The way he said it made it sound like he wasn't just panicking or just in shock or confused from the impact of the fall. He really believed someone was down there with him. That made everything way worse. We had no idea if the place had people squatting in it. There were beer cans and old blankets and stuff like that lying around, but we hadn't seen anyone. Now, he was down there, broken and screaming and saying someone was near him. One of my other friends decided to go down no matter what. He ran to the other side of the building looking for the entrance to the basement. The rest of us just waited by the edge of the hole trying to call 911. Service was garbage inside the building and we would get through but it would cut out. During this, our other friend had managed to find his way down into the basement room where Mike was laying. He called back up that he couldn't see anyone else, but he did hear something moving further back in the dark. While he was with Mike, one of us had to run out near the door to finally get a clear signal. We told them what happened and they said an ambulance was coming, but it felt like forever. The whole time, our friend who had gotten into the basement was trying to calm Mike down, but he kept saying over and over that someone had been standing near him. At one point, he even said he thought they were naked. I don't know if that was just shock or pain talking, but it made the whole thing even creepier. We finally heard the ambulance outside and had to run back out to flag them down. The paramedics came in with stretchers and lights. Even with all their gear, it looked dangerous getting him out of there because the floors and stairs were all falling apart. They managed to get him out without anything else collapsing. We never saw anyone else in there, but even the paramedics said they heard noises deeper in the basement when they were inside. They shrugged it off like rats or animals, but I'll never forget the way my friend's face looked when he swore he saw a naked person down there. Mike ended up surviving, but his leg was destroyed. Multiple breaks, surgery, pins, the works. He has a limp now. That was the end of that type of stuff for us. Every time I think about it, I picture him lying on that floor, screaming that there was someone down there with him. I don't know if it was real or just his brain short-circuiting from the pain, but either way, it was enough to make me never want to step into another abandoned building ever again. Back when I was around 19, me and a buddy of mine used to go around looking for scrap metal. We weren't the only ones. We live in a real shit area, and a lot of kids in my town did it. It wasn't like we were hauling truckloads, but if you pulled copper wire out of old buildings or grabbed a few pounds of brass, you could sell it off at the yard and at least have gas or beer money. It definitely wasn't legal, but it also wasn't some crazy heist. It was just what broke kids did when there weren't many other options. There was this mall about 10 minutes from where I grew up. It had been closed for years. People had stripped most of it already, but every once in a while you'd hear someone say there was still wire left in the walls, or junk worth grabbing in the service corridors. One night, me and my friend decided to go check it out. He had a cheap pair of bolt cutters, I had a backpack, and we both had flashlights. That was it. I met him at the basketball court a few blocks away from my mom's apartment. We walked over to the mall and found an entrance near what used to be a Sears. The big glass windows were all already gone, so we just slipped in. It was dead quiet. The place was trashed, but our flashlights made everything look even worse. Ceiling tiles falling down, glass all over the floor, old food court signs half ripped down. We didn't waste any time in the open sections. Scrapping in that area was so common that it wasn't out of the ordinary for cops to just randomly swing by and catch people, so we tried to keep a low profile. We stuck to the service hallways behind the stores. It was pretty gnarly in there, junk everywhere and peeling paint on the walls. Most of the doors we tried were either locked or had been kicked in and led to nothing worth grabbing. We weren't finding much, and I was already thinking it was a bust. Then, we hit one door that wasn't locked all the way. The handle was locked, so it seemed like you couldn't open it at a first impression, but when you pressed on the door itself, it scraped inward. My buddy pushed it with his flashlight and got it about halfway open. When he did it, the beam lit up something right away, and at a first glance, I thought it was just a huge pile of dirty white trash bags. But it wasn't. It was faces. Not real faces, mannequins. The room was full of mannequins. Some were standing there like they were still in a store window, posed and human-like. Others were piled up sideways, arms bent wrong, torsos leaning on each other, heads twisted. They were all in surprisingly good shape. The room was like a time capsule. We stepped in and stood there for a minute, just shining our lights around, not talking. There had to have been like 100 of them, maybe more. I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating, but it was a ton of them. Like the whole mall had just shoved every mannequin into one storage room, then forgotten to come back and take them away. I noticed it looked weirdly cramped in certain areas. The way the mannequins had been stacked in places was not how I would think someone would choose to store them. It was just different, like someone wanted to block the back part of the room or something. I chalked it up to the whole place just being an abandoned mess, but I remember clocking it. It was a very surreal experience to be in there sweeping a flashlight across dozens of bare plastic legs and cracked torsos with holes in them. Their eyes would glint when you passed the light over them, like they were watching you. It was freaky. For some reason, the smell in there was way worse than in the hallway. I don't really know how to describe it, but it was faintly like sewage or something. Then, I saw it. At first, I thought it was just an oddly placed mannequin tipped against the pile in the back, but the angle of the head was strange, and the hair wasn't right. It didn't look like a wig. It was greasy and long and matted up. It hung down over the face in a big mess, and I could see a single eye looking back at me through it. It was a man. He had pressed himself tightly among the other mannequins, perfectly still. He was staring back at me through the hair with this wide, terrified eye. It was horrifying. I immediately moved the flashlight off his face and pretended like I hadn't seen him. Most street people I've met have been totally harmless, but the truth is, you never know what someone is capable of, especially if they feel desperate or threatened. My buddy hadn't even noticed him. I grabbed my friend's arm and was like, "Hey, I have to show you something out in the hallway." Then I started dragging him out. He didn't pick up on my tone at all and was like, "What are you doing?" But as soon as we were out of the room, I whispered to him what I had seen, and you could see the blood drain from his face. At that same moment, we heard a pile of mannequins collapse from inside the room. I don't know what the guy's intentions were, but it was clear he was coming out from his hiding spot. We started running down the hallway, tripping on cords and old junk. I don't even remember which way we went or how we managed to find our way out in the panic, but we shoved our way through multiple busted doors that somehow led back out into the open food court area. We kept running until we were back at the basketball court and then just sat there against the fence, not saying anything. I couldn't stop looping around the idea of how close we'd gotten to him. We were right next to this guy. How long had he been sitting in there, hiding there? We felt like what must have happened is he heard us coming and then just decided to stash himself, not expecting us to figure out you could get into that storage room. We never heard a sound, not even his breathing. We wondered if maybe there was a living space back there, hidden by the mannequins, and that's why he tried to keep the door looking like it was locked, to keep people out. The scariest part of it was how still he was, and how scared he looked to see me. They tore down that mall a few years later, but the surreal image of all those mannequins piled up like a weird art exhibit, and the look in that guy's eye when the light hit him will remain vivid in my memory for a long, long time. This was one of the scariest things that ever happened to me. I was 19 or 20, kayaking with a friend in the fog on a remote pond. He had a cheap inflatable kayak, the same one as my parents, and we'd take them out sometimes. The evening this happened, heavy fog was rolling in and settling out on the water. No swimmers, no boats, just us. We'd been out there for a while, and the fog had completely covered the pond. Generally, we'd been sort of drifting around together, just talking. I'd never been kayaking before with the fog the way it was that evening. It was wild. It muffled everything, and once you were out there, the shoreline just disappeared. I remember being blown away by how it felt so alone out there, enveloped in it. I'd paddle and think I was still next to him, but then I'd hear his voice faint like he was farther off than I thought. Over time, we just kind of drifted apart to go explore and do our own thing. It really felt like being on another planet. I was just kind of taking it all in when suddenly, out of the blue, I heard splashing. I lifted my paddle out of the water to get a better listen. The first thought that went through my head was that maybe it was a loon or some other kind of bird that got freaked out after being surprised by my friend, but it was way too aggressive. There wasn't any reason I could think of that would justify the level of thrashing around that I was hearing. Then came muffled yelling. It was my friend. I spun my kayak toward the sound and started paddling as hard as I could in the direction I had heard him call out. I remember this deep feeling of panic setting in because I could tell something was wrong by what I was hearing, but I couldn't see anything, so my imagination was filling in all the blanks with horrible things. I didn't know what I was paddling into. It took maybe a full minute or so before I saw him. He was in the water a little ways out from the shore with his kayak tipped, clinging to the side and kicking to stay up. He was looking off into the woods. Aside from the beach and boat launch, the wood line went right down to the edge of the water the entire way around the pond. Between the evening setting in, the fog, and the darkness of the woods, I couldn't see anything beyond the edge of the tree line. As I got closer, it looked like he had capsized himself somehow. I half expected him to be laughing, but he wasn't. He wasn't saying anything, just staring into the woods. I helped him get his kayak upright, and he was able to climb back in, but he was like breathing heavy and super pale. He looked terrified. As soon as he was in his kayak, he was whispering to me that someone had tipped him over. At first, I thought he meant me, like he thought I'd clipped him or something, but he kept saying no, he knew it wasn't me. He said he'd been gliding along the shallows next to the shoreline, and completely out of nowhere, someone ran out from the woods, came straight down waist deep into the water, and started grabbing and pulling at him until his kayak flipped over with him inside it, upside down underwater. He said the guy tried to hold him under, but that he'd been able to kick out and come back up for air, and that the guy just ran out of the water and back into the trees. I felt like I couldn't even catch up to the situation. I had to ask him to repeat it so I could wrap my head around it. He wasn't making it up. We both sat there, quiet, listening, staring toward the edge of the woods through the fog. That's when we heard it. Movement from the tree line. The faint snaps of twigs, the sound of someone walking through the forest. Whoever it was in there, watching us. We looked at each other and knew going back to the boat launch was a bad idea. It was the only clear spot on the lake to pull the kayaks out, which meant if someone wanted to trap us or do harm, that's where they'd know to wait. I had no idea what this person's deal was, but the way my friend described the situation, it sounded like someone who clearly had bad intentions. We agreed without even really talking it through. Cross the pond and get out on the opposite side. That was the only way we could outpace this person. So we started paddling. In the background, you could hear whoever it was crashing through the woods like they were trying to keep pace with us. We got to the shallows, jumped out, dragged the kayaks up on the bank and just left them there. Didn't care if we lost them. Our only thought was to get to the road. That meant bushwhacking through wet woods in near dark, up the hill, away from the water. When we finally hit the main road to the pond access, it was empty and quiet. My friend had left his phone in the car, but I had mine and I called the cops. They said to wait near the road until an officer could meet us. That's when it got even scarier. While we waited, a vehicle came creeping up the road from the boat launch, lights off, moving slow. It was some old beater you could barely make out. We scrambled off the road into a ditch, crouching in the brush and listening as it drove by. But that wasn't it. As we climbed back up onto the road, it came back down. You could tell it was the same car by how the belt was squealing. We hopped back over the embankment and hid as it went by again. The car turned around at the boat launch one more time and came back up the road, slow like it was looking for us. Then it was gone. Eventually, the police showed up. We flagged them down and told them what happened. They took us back around to the launch where we'd parked, got our statements, and said they'd check the area. Obviously, they didn't find anyone. They asked if we wanted to file a full report, but it felt pointless. We didn't even get a good look at the guy or the car. There was no reasonable explanation for what had happened. Who runs out of the trees and down into the water, then tries to drown someone, and then drives up and down the road with their lights off? There was no way to know for sure if it was the same person, but it must have been. They had their lights off and went out and back from the boat launch 3 times. I don't know exactly what they were doing, but it sure seemed like they wanted to make sure we didn't get out. I don't know why it is. I've just never been the type to get spooked, but this experience remains my exception to the rule. This was a couple years ago, 2023, I think. I was driving alone out of state trying to get back home. I live in the South and I'd been up in New England for a job. I hate flying, and lucky for me, I need my truck for work, even long distance jobs, so I had driven all the way up and was heading back. This was late fall, and the fog that night was worse than anything I dealt with down south, almost to the point where I was considering pulling over and waiting it out. My high beams only made it worse, and it felt like I could barely see past the hood of my truck, just total whiteout. I had a map app going, but my cell lost signal somewhere between the mountains after leaving the highway to cut across some roads that would put me on the interstate. I quit and restarted the app, which was my fatal mistake because it wouldn't reconnect. My navigation had gone completely blind. One wrong turn led to another, and suddenly I was on a dirt road. Just hard-packed dirt with trees on both sides and the damn fog. I figured if I just kept going straight long enough, it would eventually have to spit me out onto a bigger road or pavement, but that didn't happen. Instead, I realized I'd been driving like that for almost 20 minutes without seeing another car. I had slowed down considerably to try and restart my phone, hoping it would jumpstart my signal, when suddenly headlights appeared behind me, cutting through the fog. I was relieved, thinking finally there's another driver, I must be on track to get somewhere. But then, the lights flashed. It was a cop. It definitely struck me as odd given the fact that I felt like we were in the middle of absolute nowhere, and I hadn't been doing anything wrong as far as I could tell. But I also needed help getting out of there, so the blue lights seemed more like a blessing than a curse. I was already basically pulled over anyway, but I got over onto the dirt embankment as best I could, put it in park, and waited. The car rolled to a stop behind me. Then the driver's door opened and someone got out. I could barely tell it was a woman by the way the headlights lit up her hair. She slowly made her way up to my window, stopping to peek over the side into the bed of my truck. No hat, no real uniform, just khakis and a dark jacket with something clipped on the front. She motioned for me to put down the window, so I cracked it. Then she asked for my license and registration. I asked her why she pulled me over. She just repeated herself, nothing else. I assumed she would get to the point eventually, so I handed them over. She stepped back behind my truck and looked at my license plate, then back at me. Then she said something like, "You're not from here." It was obvious information. My plates were out of state, my license and registration had my address and home state on them, so I didn't understand why she had even said it. And the way she said it made it sound like I'd done something wrong. I told her I was heading back south, just trying to get to the interstate to leave. Then she came back up to the window and started asking weird questions, not traffic stop questions. Did I follow politics? What did I think about certain laws? She tried to make it seem like it was all just part of a natural pullover conversation, but it definitely wasn't. She was like trying to categorize me or something. The whole line of questioning was just totally bizarre, and all of it was driving in this roundabout way toward like figuring out who I had voted for or something. This woman was incredibly strange. She didn't know how to speak to other people. I can't remember everything, just that it didn't make sense for a cop to be asking me any of it. I've been pulled over before, and cops just don't start asking you about your personal views on things. I could tell she was getting pissed off every time I tried to evade her questions. I kept giving her answers like, "I'm just passing through," or "I don't really talk politics, sorry." But it felt like she kept trying to pin me down or make me say something she was fishing for. At some point, she turned to her vehicle and the light from her headlights illuminated her badge and drew my attention to it. It wasn't real. You could clearly see it was cheap plastic, like something off eBay. I could also see that she had a firearm holstered at her side. I directly asked her if she was with the state police or some other law enforcement agency. There was a pause, but then she didn't deny it. She just told me that she lived in the area and was part of a group that were responsible for protecting her community. Let that sink in. Not law enforcement, just some random person out there with a firearm, fake badge, and blue light pulling people over as they saw fit. That was the moment it hit me how bad this was. I didn't let on how disturbing I found this, and I politely asked for my license and registration back. She didn't give them back. She said she was going to finish asking me questions first. The way she said it was completely calm, like she felt totally comfortable exerting this made-up authority over me. The fog made everything worse. It felt like we were in a bubble and I was trapped with her, just her and me in the middle of nowhere. Then, like an honest-to-God miracle, headlights showed up again in the fog. Another car was coming from behind us way down the road. The woman stiffened up as soon as she saw it. She muttered something I couldn't hear, handed me back my license and registration, then just turned and jogged back to her vehicle, jumped in, slammed the door, and peeled out. The other car slowed down behind me and rolled to a stop. It was just some regular guy in a sedan. He asked if I was okay, said he saw the lights ahead and wondered if there had been an accident. I told him what had happened and that I was lost. He gave me directions and offered to let me follow him back toward the main highway. I thanked him and followed his taillights out until I finally got cell signal again. I don't know what she would have done if that other car hadn't shown up. I don't know if her gun was real or if that was also fake. All I know is she wasn't a cop, she wasn't law enforcement of any kind, and she had no reason to pull me over. No idea if there were actually a group of people like she said, or if she just took it upon herself to be some sort of vigilante or something. But she seemed to really believe she was out there doing some sort of duty. In her head, she actually thought she was doing something noble. That's the scariest part. People like that don't know they're crazy. They think they're right. I was part of the volunteer search and rescue crew in my old town for about 6 years before I moved. Smaller coastal place, not tiny, but everyone kind of knew each other through 1 or 2 degrees. Most people there either fish, work the ferry, or deal with tourism in the summer. Search and rescue wasn't a huge operation, just locals with boats and gear and a couple guys who had actual training. Most of the time it was nothing, helping someone who ran out of gas or some tourist who didn't read the tides right. This one night, the weather was nasty. The fog had come in real bad, which wasn't unusual, but I'm talking like can't see 50 feet in front of you thick, which on top of some light to moderate rain had made it pretty ugly. We got a call that a small boat had struck rocks just offshore. We didn't know the full extent of it, but we were told it was bad. Apparently, people in the area had seen strange lights near the shoreline. Nobody knew if it was survivors signaling or what, but the call was enough for the crew to mobilize. We got out there with headlamps and flashlights, splitting up along different stretches of beach and combing to see if we could spot anyone. I got paired with a couple other guys at first, but the way the beach curves around, it's easy to lose sight of each other, especially with the fog, rain, and rock formations. I ended up further up the beach by myself, climbing up a big hill that completely split the beach in two, part rocky outcrop, part dunes. That's when I saw it. Through a break in the fog, just far enough up the shoreline, I could see an orange glow. My first thought was signal fire from the crew that had wrecked, so I started heading toward it. The closer I got though, the less it felt right. The fire wasn't small, it was big, almost like a bonfire, and I could see figures around it moving back and forth, distorted, foggy silhouettes that were like warping with the flicker of the firelight. At first I was relieved, people were alive, but then I noticed what they were doing. They weren't huddled for warmth or waving for help. They were actively feeding the fire, tossing in what looked like driftwood and chunks of broken boards from a big pile. I could smell kerosene. The flames were huge, way brighter than anything you'd need for signaling. And the position of it wasn't in a safe clearing. It was right in line with one of the most dangerous rock beds along the coast. From out on the water, in thick fog and rain, it would very easily look like a guide to shore, except it would bring you straight into the rocks. I stopped approaching and just watched, trying to understand what the hell was happening. These were terrible weather conditions, and there was no reason anyone would be out here having some sort of bonfire party or something. There were 3 of them that I could make out, 2 by the fire, 1 off to the side by the pile of unburnt wood. That figure was pouring something on the pile. For those of you who don't know, there's a thing in coastal places called wrecking. It comes from an older time when people lured ships onto the rocks so they'd crash, and then they could steal the cargo. I'm not saying that's what this was necessarily, because that was like historical stuff, something centuries ago. But watching them, I realized this was basically the same thing right in front of me. They were either total idiots or deliberately building a massive fire right on the shoreline to lure ships into the rocks. I was maybe 20 yards away from these people, maybe less, basically where the woods faded out and the beach began. They hadn't seen me yet, and I didn't know if I should try to radio someone or just run back to the others and notify them. While I was standing there thinking through it, I heard something behind me and turned around. Someone came out of the trees behind me. They were carrying an armful of branches. I hadn't even heard them until they were practically on top of me. They stopped cold when they saw me standing there just a couple yards away. Then they said a name. I don't remember what it was, but from his tone, it sounded like he was asking to confirm if I was this person. Neither of us could see much about the other person, just that we were both dark figures. I didn't say anything. And then I saw him look over and basically clock how many people were by the fire. I think this is when he realized I wasn't one of his friends. That's when he dropped the wood and lunged at me. He must have pieced it together and was panicking that they'd been found out. He grabbed the front of my jacket and started pulling, like he was trying to drag me toward the fire and his friends. Then he started yelling out to them. I just went into total survival mode, and I got him with an elbow somewhere in the face. He let go long enough for me to slip out and start running. I could hear at least him behind me, if not all of them, until I was halfway down the hill, shouting and running back toward my crew. We were completely spread out at that point, so I sprinted back the way I'd come quite a ways until I saw flashlights down the beach. I must have looked insane, out of breath, rambling about a fire and people trying to drag me. We all gathered together and went back in force. By the time we got there, the fire was still burning, but the people were gone, just vanished into the fog. There was a big stack of mixed wood nearby. I don't know how they had gotten it all out there. There was a can of kerosene tossed off toward the woods. The boat we'd been called about had been run ashore and ditched. The people were safe but shook up. Later, the guys who had crashed told us about how the light and glare had pulled them in, basically confirming everything I had thought. In the weeks after, I asked around a little. Nobody admitted to knowing anything. I read more about wrecking and how sometimes it wasn't even about stealing cargo. Sometimes people just wanted to cause damage or had their own twisted reasons. What's so disturbing too is how small the community is. It's not some faceless town where strangers come and go every day. The people at that fire were locals, maybe even people I'd stood behind at the grocery store. They just went back to their lives after that night, blending in like nothing had happened. And for all I know, they're still there to this day. I took up backpacking a few years ago, and the first couple times I went, I immediately fell in love with it. Then this happened, and I can confidently tell you that I will never do it or any other type of camping, ever, again. So I went on this trip by myself. I had some vacation days from work stacked up and picked a spot about 3 hours away from where I lived. This was definitely more of a solo trip than I had done before. This area had a bunch of trails to hike and a couple small bodies of water and just massive amounts of woodland. The surrounding area was pretty poor and had a reputation as being sketchy, but the nature and hiking were supposed to be amazing. It's definitely not something I'd recommend doing by yourself the first time. You really need to know your stuff and make sure you bring everything you need, because once you're out there, that's it. Anyway, I drove out, found a park and ride to leave my car in, and spent the first day just hiking in. There were not designated campsites. You'd create a primitive spot you found yourself, set up, and leave it like you found it when you were done. That's basically all I did the first day. Hike in and set up a spot with my tent, cooking gear, pad, and bag. The spot I chose was up on a hill above a lake. My understanding was that the locals used it for fishing, but that their access was way on the other side. On the second day, I went for a long hike and it was extremely humid out. So on the way back, I got down to the water, stripped down to shorts, swam out and cooled off. It was exactly what I needed after a sweaty day of trudging around. When I got back to the shore, I sat there just drip drying for a minute before I decided I would eat something. But when I went back to where I had left my things, they were gone. Like completely gone. Nothing. My first reaction was that I must have made a mistake, and that I was just disoriented and unable to figure out where I had left them. But no, I looked up and down the way I'd come in, and everything was gone. Shoes, pants, shirt, backpack full of essentials, including my phone. I remember this flood of emotions. On the one hand, I was furious, obviously, but on the other, I was genuinely mortified by the implication that someone was out there in my immediate vicinity and had targeted me in this way. I didn't know if they were gone or watching me or what. I knew nothing except that they knew where I was and had waited until I was in the water to take my things. I had no other choice but to hike the rest of the way back to my camp totally barefoot while getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. Back at camp, everything was normal. Luckily, I had left a change of clothes as well as my wallet, car keys, and some food behind with the rest of my gear. But I didn't have another pair of boots or any of my most essential kit. Almost everything that was a necessity had been in my backpack. It was getting late in the day, and after about an hour or so of fuming about it, I settled on the idea of staying the night and leaving at first light. I had no way to light a fire, and my knife and multi-tool were gone. So for dinner, I just ate whatever I had left for food that didn't need a can opener, then crawled into my tent and sleeping bag in the dark. Sometime in the night, I woke up. There was a noise. It sounded like an animal moving around. I had put my garbage in a trash bag and hoisted it up into a tree, so I thought maybe something was sniffing around for it. But as I listened, I could hear that very slowly it was moving toward me and not the garbage. Whatever it was trying to be very quiet. Then, I felt a tug at the bottom of the tent, like whatever it was had nibbled on the guy line between the tent and the stake. I clapped my hands and yelled out to spook it, and the tugging stopped. But whatever it was didn't move away from the tent. Then, I heard steps. It was a person, and there was was more than one walking around my tent. I could hear one set of footsteps down by my feet where the tugging had come from, but I could also hear one up near my head and the entrance to the tent. Then I heard the sound that sent me into a full-blown panic. It was the click and ratchet of a zip tie on the zippers to my tent. Someone was sealing me in. I started screaming and trying to open the tent, but at that exact moment, the whole thing jerked sideways and I fell forward into the side panel, causing the tent to flip onto its side and sending me face first directly into the ground. I hit it so hard I thought I broke a tooth. Then I heard the stakes being pulled up, and before I knew it, the tent was being dragged with me inside. The tent had completely collapsed in on me. I could feel myself being dragged over roots and rocks. At that point, I just started screaming for help as loud as I could. Then I remember this feeling of like floating as the whole thing swung back and forth like a hammock and then was just falling. Whoever it was had thrown me down the embankment. My head hit the ground first, and I saw stars as the rest of me continued to tumble downward, smacking into what felt like trees, rocks, and stumps until I came to rest. It was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. Outside and above me, I could hear voices, muffled. One of them laughed, then it all went quiet. No more movement, no more dragging, nothing. I didn't move for a long time. I just played dead. My shoulder hurt, my head, my ribs, and my wrist, but I had no idea how extensive the damage was. My honest guess is that I lay there for probably an hour until I started to see light coming through the fabric. It very well could have been longer because later I found out I had a concussion, so it's possible I was going in and out of consciousness and more time had actually passed. Anyway, I started trying to move around and was able to tear my way through the tent fabric, which had been punctured multiple times in the chaos. I'm lucky I wasn't stabbed by any of the sticks or branches that had made it through the material. Once I was out and back on my feet, I could see I wasn't bleeding, thank God, but I definitely suspected and would later confirm that I had multiple fractures. I climbed back up the hill and found my way back to the campsite. Whoever it was long gone, but the site had been completely ransacked, or what was left of it anyway. I left everything and got back on the trail immediately. It was dawn, so I was able to see, but I was barefoot and physically wrecked. Hours later, I got back to my car and drove myself to the nearest town. I got directions to the nearest emergency room, and they helped me notify the sheriff. The next day, I was able to drive myself back home. I don't camp anymore at all. Even with friends. A stick snaps at night and I'm awake for the rest of the trip, so I'm done with that. It was hands down the worst night of my life. I honestly believe I'm lucky to be alive, and I can't believe those people are still out there. As far as they knew, they could have killed me, and it didn't make a difference to them. I could still be at the bottom of that hill, tangled up in a tent, rotting away for no one to ever find. Okay, so this was a legit traumatizing experience. I hate camping, but once a year my friends drag me into it for a weekend. We're all women in our 30s, a couple of us have kids. We grew up going to the same state park with our parents, and now that we're older and spread out across multiple states, it's a thing we do each year to catch up. I'd rather be visiting a new city or something, frankly, but I'm the odd one out, so this is about as close as I get to a girls' weekend each year without husbands or kids. There isn't any cell service, but the campground is decent. Loops of lean-tos and tent sites, clean bathrooms with plumbing and showers, as well as a small lake and day-use area where people sit at picnic tables, grill, throw horseshoes, and rent pedal boats during the day. One thing we've always done, going way back, is after dark, walk down to the water. It was nice down there at night because it was completely deserted, closed to the public, and we always had it all to ourselves. So that's what we did. This was the Saturday night of that weekend, I believe, so the last night before we all headed out the next morning. We left the fire smoldering, grabbed our headlamps and flashlights, then started walking down to the day-use area. You basically walk through the whole campground to get there, because it's near the entrance. Most of the other campsites were already hunkered down for the night. There were a few that still had fires going, and people sitting around chatting, but otherwise the place was pretty quiet. So we get down there, and it's beautiful, stars and moon and all of that. But I hadn't peed before I left, and it was starting to nag at me. There's a porta potty in the parking lot of the day use area at the far end of the field. To get there, you cross the clearing and then a small wooden footbridge over the spillway. I left my friends behind and told them I was going to the bathroom. Halfway over the bridge, for no reason in particular, I happened to turn around and look down over the side for a peek at the water below. But my aim was off, and instead, I hit the opposite bank of the creek with my headlamp beam. It lit up the whole other side. At that same moment, I saw movement. Someone stepped behind a tree near the other end of the bridge, the side I had just come from. It was so brief I barely caught it, but I knew I had seen a man. It took me so by surprise that I just stood there, shining the light on the tree. Again, to remind you readers of the context, it's like 10 p.m. in the day use area, where nobody has any reason to be after dark. This guy, with no headlamp or flashlight, had clearly been following me for who knows how long, and now that I had spotted him, was trying to hide from me. I remember holding my breath to help myself calm down and try to think of a solution. I believed that as long as I had my headlamp shining on the tree he was hiding behind, he probably would stay there. But I also knew that my headlamp was basically a moving target, and if I turned around to run, he would know exactly where I was. I started backing away from the bridge toward the gravel path that led up to the parking lot. When I reached the driveway, instinct completely took over, and I don't know why it occurred to me to do this, but it is what it is. I ran behind the nearest tree, took my headlamp off, and basically tied it to the first branch I could find to make it look like a decoy of me. Then I ducked into the shadows where the grass turned into forest, ran back toward the bridge, and just hid in the dark in the woods. I also could not be 100% sure that this guy had not seen me do it, and even though it was dark under all the tree cover, I felt completely exposed. Then I saw him, a figure crossing the bridge. He was moving cautiously, like he wasn't totally sure about the situation. I could see him move across the bridge through the spots of moonlight and then disappear again into darkness on the other side. Then I saw my headlamp move. The light swung and fell to the ground like it had been hit. I knew I had to gamble. I took the risk and made a break for it. I made it across the bridge and up through the break in the trees leading back to the clearing. As soon as I reached the edge of the field, I could see my friends with their lights all the way on the other end. I've never run harder in my life. When I reached them, I quickly explained the situation as I was ushering them onto the trail. We made it back to the campsite and immediately put out what was left of the fire. Then we all got into our respective vehicles, locked the doors, and just stayed in them for the rest of the night. Nobody was comfortable spending the night in the lean-to or tents knowing some weirdo stalker was out there roaming around. Technically, we had broken the park rules by being in the day use area that night, but I didn't care. Safety mattered way more. So on the way out, I mentioned what had happened to the park manager. She seemed deeply concerned and told us she'd look into it, then refunded our reservation. That was the last time we did the group camping thing. Since then, I've gotten my way and we've been able to travel a bit and stay in hotels. But that experience permanently left a mark on me. It will always upset me thinking about what that guy might have done if I hadn't noticed him and just kept walking off by myself, completely unaware. I went on a camping trip through the West and Southwest with a buddy of mine when we graduated from college. We did a kind of road trip thing where we would find dispersed spots along the way. If you don't know, dispersed camping is basically where you camp on public land but not in an official campground. We'd pull off on old fire roads or whatever, drive until you couldn't anymore, and then walk off a bit to find a flat patch and set up camp for the night. No water, no bathrooms, you're on your own. We stayed in regular campgrounds too, but this was free and rarely were there other people to deal with, so we did a little bit of both. I forget what state this was in, but it was late afternoon, early evening when we turned off the main road and onto this rutted dirt path that barely looked like it had been used in years. We drove until we found a clearing big enough to park. Off to the side, maybe a couple hundred yards down the same path, was another vehicle. That threw us a bit. It really wasn't common to see anyone else doing this, even though it wasn't outside the realm of possibility. Beside the car was a small, bright-colored tent, neon orange. At first, we thought, okay, someone else beat us to the punch. Fine. We figured we'd just walk down, say hi, let them know we'd keep our distance, and wouldn't block them in if they needed to leave. Just good neighbor etiquette. So we start down the road, and as we get closer, something starts to feel wrong. The whole vibe was weird. Nobody was there. As you got closer, you could see that the tent wasn't zipped up, and it looked half crushed in. The car door was hanging open too. Not wide, but enough that it looked off. There was a sleeping bag dragged halfway out of the tent with dark stains on it. To be fair, I guess it could have been mud, but the same dark color was also along the ground, leading off into the brush. If I'm being honest, both of us thought it looked like drag marks and blood. I know that's dramatic, and maybe it's because we were on edge, but that's what it looked like. I guess there's a reality where this could have been some homeless person's camp, and the reason the gear looked all trashed was because it was old and maybe this person wasn't mentally all there or something. But something about this just felt wrong. The gear was scattered all around. Backpack, clothes, unopened food cans, pots and pans dumped, a cooler tipped over. Just chaos. If it had been a bear or something, you'd see claw marks, food gone, maybe trash torn up. It looked like somebody had been pulled out of that tent fast and violently, and then the sight just completely savaged, like someone was looking for something. That's when we heard it. From behind us, a pickup truck with a covered bed was coming down the road. We didn't know the area, so in theory, this could have been a very busy road, I guess. But I'm being extraordinarily generous with that hypothetical. There were no houses, no buildings at all, nothing else. It was just some dead-end dirt road that went for a couple miles and led to this weird mess of a campsite in the middle of nowhere. My buddy whispered that we had to go. We started making our way back to the car, eyes on the truck, which stopped about 20 yards beyond our own vehicle. It was just idling there. Nobody had gotten out or rolled down a window or anything. The whole time it took for us to walk back to our car, get in and turn around, the truck didn't move. It just watched and waited. My buddy was the one behind the wheel and kept muttering that this was bad. Then we tried to pass it, to get around it and leave, but it didn't move. Now that we were closer, you could see into the cab of the truck just barely enough to make out that there were two people inside. There was no way around the truck unless they moved, and they knew it. In that moment, I think my friend and I both realized that we were completely at the mercy of whoever was in that truck. Maybe they had no connection to this weird scene at all. Maybe it was their messed up homeless camp and they were concerned we had stolen something. Or maybe something way darker had happened here and these people were returning to the site for whatever reason. Not that this was the exact same situation, but I've seen dashcam footage of people literally being held at gunpoint under very similar circumstances. So I think my friend and I, even though we weren't saying it, both knew this could get very ugly very quickly. You could see the two people inside, turning to one another and then looking back toward us like they were having a conversation about us. It was like they were deciding what to do. And then, just like that, the truck went into reverse and pulled over onto the shoulder, allowing us just enough room to pass. The next 30 seconds were the most intense of my life. We drove by at a crawl past the truck. And the whole time, I was expecting pretty much anything to happen, including getting shot through the window. We passed the truck and just kept going down the road. In the mirrors, we could see it continue to sit there on the side of the road, not moving. Eventually, we got back on the highway and drove until we could pull over, maybe 40 minutes down the road at a rest area. Once we were pulled over, we sat in the car in silence until finally I asked him if he wanted to get a motel for the night. We both laughed about it, but he knew I meant it, and he agreed. We finished the road trip, but we only ended up camping in legitimate campgrounds after that, and if an area looked particularly rough, we would get a motel for the night. There's no real way to nail down exactly what we had stumbled upon, but whatever it was, both of us agreed that we felt genuinely lucky for getting out of there. safely. I was the one looking after my sister on the day she was almost murdered. We grew up in Michigan in the late 70s. People from around here still remember a horrible stretch back then in our county with kids going missing and turning up dead. You can look it up. They never nailed down who did it, but I'm convinced, without a shadow of a doubt, that I saw his face that day. Every kid in our area heard the warnings. We had school assemblies where teachers showed us flyers with kids' faces on them. There were news reports on TV almost every night. Everyone knew there was someone out there taking kids, but nobody knew who it was. That was the backdrop of my childhood. We still played outside because that's what kids did, but there was always a little edge to it. Moms waiting out on porches, neighbors glancing at cars that slowed down. I was maybe 11 at the time and my sister was about 7. My mom worked days at a grocery store. On some afternoons, a neighbor would keep an eye on us after school, which meant we'd usually end up at the park down the street with their son. The park itself wasn't much. One big metal slide, some swings, monkey bars, and a seesaw. More than anything, it was just kind of a patch of space where kids gathered. That afternoon, after school, we did what we always did. Dropped our stuff off at the neighbors and walked over with their son. There were maybe a dozen kids there, a couple moms on the benches, and a woman pushing a stroller by the far fence and talking to her baby. I got caught up with a friend drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. My sister was with a friend of hers on the swings. Maybe 20 minutes passed when I glanced over at the swings. My sister wasn't there. I looked at the slide. Nothing. Not near the seesaw either. She was gone. I climbed up on the low wall by the fountain to get a better view. That's when I spotted her. Near the far end of the fence line, standing on her tiptoes looking into the woman's stroller. One thing about my sister, she loved babies. Anytime she saw one, she'd zone in like a magnet. They fascinated her. It didn't matter if it was a stranger at the mall or a cousin at a barbecue. If there was a stroller, she was right there. I could see her talking to the woman and then looking in and waving at the baby. I was about to call over to her to leave the woman alone and come back when I saw the woman extend her hand and then my sister reach out to take it. Then they turned and started walking toward the sidewalk at the edge of the lot. People always ask me when I tell this story why I didn't start screaming right away. And the answer is I honestly don't know. I just started running toward her. As I got closer, the sound of the shoes on the gravel made the woman's head turn. She was still holding my sister's hand and they were about 3 steps from the sidewalk. I grabbed my sister by the arm and yanked her back so hard that she stumbled into me. Then I looked down. That close, I saw everything. The baby in the stroller wasn't real. It was a doll, dressed in a little bonnet and wrapped up in a blanket to make it look like an actual human baby. I didn't even have a reaction. It made no sense. I had seen this woman pushing her baby in the stroller for the last 30 minutes along the edge of the playground without thinking twice about it. And now, the realization that the baby wasn't real completely shut me down. Then, I looked at the woman. It wasn't a woman. The guy didn't say a word. He just jerked the stroller handles back and spun it around, pushing it fast down the sidewalk away from us, like he was panicked. I stood there with my sister behind me and watched the stroller rattle over the cracks in the pavement until he cut across the lot and disappeared behind the hedges. Nobody had seen it happen. None of the parents on the benches even looked over. It was like it happened in a bubble. My sister didn't understand why I had grabbed her and was mad at me for yanking her so hard. She said I had hurt her and that the lady had been nice, showing her the baby. I walked us straight back to the playground, got my neighbor's kid, and went directly back to his house. The whole time I kept checking behind us. When we got there, I told my neighbor what had happened, and she immediately called my mom, who came home early from work. She grilled me with questions, but I didn't have good answers. I just kept repeating that it was a doll, he had a wig and big hands. Mom called the police. A patrol car came later, asked the same things, even had me try to draw the person. He took notes, but I could tell I wasn't giving him much to work with. My mom never let us back at that park without her. Years went on. The case was never solved. They came up with suspects, but nobody they could ever directly connect to the case, or at least last I checked. My sister and I grew up. Later, when she passed away in her 50s from something unrelated, it meant I became the only one who still remembered. Just me. As I've gotten older, I think about the what ifs all the time. What if I hadn't looked over when I did? If I'd been wrapped up in what I was doing for just a minute longer? If there had been a car waiting at the corner? It wouldn't have taken much, and she would have been gone. I can't prove it was the same person who killed those kids. But every time I read about those killings back then, the timeline, the area, it all lines up for me. I know what I saw, I know what almost happened. And even though he was wearing a bunch of makeup and a wig, every time I look at the police sketches, I know I'm looking into the eyes of the person who tried to murder my little sister. This was one of the most fucked things I've ever seen in my life. I deliver appliances, refrigerators, ranges, and sometimes washers. Been doing it a long time. I actually enjoy it. I end up seeing a lot of the state that I otherwise wouldn't, and it's a little different every day. It's a two-person job though, and I have a younger guy with me who helps me carry the stuff in and out. So we had a ticket for a low-income complex in a town in the southern part of the state. Very poor area. Old brick building, a lot of windows with mismatched curtains or blankets or towels tacked up. The landlord met us out front when we got there. He told us the tenant wasn't answering, but he'd unlock the unit and to just swap the fridge and lock up. He said it was a kind of goodwill thing. The tenant and his mother were living together, and he had been taking care of her, but she passed recently. I guess the landlord was a family friend or something and wanted to do something for the guy. He told us to lock the door behind us on our way out, then took off to some other property he managed in another town. We hauled the new fridge off the truck, got it to the lobby, then up to the third floor on the service elevator. The door to the unit was left open, resting on the frame. I pushed it open and called out a quick hello. No answer. We went in. Inside was dark. There were piles of mail and takeout cups stacked by the couch. It also smelled different inside the apartment than it had in the hall, like bad. I assumed it was the old fridge. One thing I do hate about the job is having to work in people's personal spaces. Some people make no attempt to even be remotely sanitary. I've seen horribly disgusting things, and this place smelled maybe the worst. We pulled the fridge out from the wall, unplugged it, swapped it with the new one on the dolly, and started wheeling it out into the hallway. That's when I heard a voice down the hall. It sounded like someone talking quietly on the phone in another room. I assumed maybe the tenant had been there the whole time on a call, and that's why he never responded to us or the landlord. We got the old fridge out onto the truck, then came back up to install the new one. The smell in the apartment was so bad I could tell it was really bothering the kid helping me. So I told him he could take the new unit's trash packaging back to the truck, secure the old one with straps, and wait there if he wanted. He agreed and left. I slid the new fridge into place, leveled it, and hooked up the water line. I could still hear the voice down the hall, so I thought, what the hell, I'll just let them know we're done here and I'll be out of their hair. I followed the sound down the hallway and was almost to the room when I tripped over a pile of clothes that had been left on the floor. Instinctively, I reached out to catch myself, but ended up pushing on the door in front of me, which wasn't locked, and swung in about halfway. What I saw to this day is an image I cannot erase from my memory. The tenant, who was now looking directly at me, was crouched beside the bed, bowl in one hand and a spoon in the other, and was spooning soup up to a person laying in bed under the blankets. But it wasn't a person in the bed. It was a life-sized doll. It wasn't a store dummy or mannequin or something like that. It looked like something he had made himself. The face was all patches of some leathery-looking material, and it was painted to look like a face. It looked like skin that had been sewn together and was covered with whatever disgusting soup or chili this guy had been trying to feed it. There were no eyes, just dark holes in the skin. The hands were resting on the covers inside of gloves, and the neck and wrists had discolored fabric wrapped around them like bandages. The clothes, from what I could see on the upper half, looked like older women's clothing, the kind you see on church ladies, but they were filthy and covered with dirt and stains. It smelled horrible. Right then, the tenant immediately stood up and put himself between me and the bed and started explaining that his mother was sick, needed rest, and asked me to please leave. That's when my brain caught up to what I was looking at. He stepped right up to me, still holding the bowl and spoon, telling me about how she hadn't been well, she didn't want to eat, and that he was starting to get scared for her health. I started backing away down the hall, but he followed me. And now he was crying. This dude was off his rocker, and I think in that moment realized how bad the situation looked, and you could just see him start breaking down. He started begging me not to tell anyone as I'm backing down the hallway toward the living room. He said he wasn't hurting anybody, that it was just him and her, and he didn't want to lose her and had to take care of her. When I made it to the living room, he swung past me and put himself in front of the door to the apartment, blocking the only exit. He didn't grab me or anything, didn't threaten me, but he stood in front of the door, completely preventing me from leaving and pleading for me to understand and not tell anyone what he had done. I felt like I had no choice but to lie. I told him that I wouldn't make trouble and that I would have done the same thing in his shoes. Then, there was silence. I don't know what was going through his head, but there's a real chance that this guy was considering whether or not he could get away with removing me from the equation completely. He finally looks over his shoulder, out the window, presumably at my helper sitting in our truck. Then I watched something click in his head, and he moved out of the way. I kept my hands where he could see them, put the paperwork on the counter, and walked past him out of the apartment. My helper was in the truck with the cab door open. He asked if everything was okay. I didn't talk until halfway through the ride back to the store, when I called the landlord's number on the ticket. I told him straight up, there's something not right in that unit. I didn't use words like body or grave or any of that because I didn't know for sure. I just said that the guy needed help and that the smell was real bad in there. The landlord said he would go up later when he got back. That was it. It wasn't any of my business to follow up and see if the landlord actually checked in on him. And I wasn't about to go out of my way to get the police involved on this guy while he was grieving when it's totally possible I was mistaken. But if you ask me what I saw, it was a guy completely in denial who had made some kind of doll out of material that looked like it had been dug up. And this guy was trying to convince himself that his mother was still alive. Our state isn't huge, so I feel like I would have heard something about like graves being dug up or something dramatic like that, but I never did. I've gone into hundreds, maybe thousands of homes. You see mess, poverty, and filth, but this was just a whole different level of disturbing. I lived with a roommate I'd met online for about a half a year when I was in my late 20s. It wasn't a great setup. Rent was cheap and I needed it, so I ignored the fact that he was kind of a strange guy. We weren't close friends or anything like that. I found the room through Craigslist. He seemed fine when I first met him, and I figured I could tolerate some quirks if it kept my rent low. At first, things were normal enough. He was outgoing, a little too much to be honest, and it was clear pretty quickly that he was kind of into me. I'm a guy, and I'm not into guys, but it didn't like freak me out or anything. I just kind of thought it was funny and brushed it off. At one point, he made a joke about us being together, but when I didn't laugh, he backed off, so it seemed like he could take rejection in stride. I didn't feel threatened or anything. It was more just a little awkward than anything else, until this happened. The first weird thing was when he brought home this CPR dummy. He was a med student and told me that it was for training class or something. I honestly can't remember the excuse. He joked about it like it wasn't weird and said something along the lines of, if I wasn't interested in him, he'd have to settle for second best, meaning the dummy. I didn't like it, but I thought it was just him trying too hard to be funny. For a while, it was this ongoing joke. I came home once and the dummy was on the couch with the TV remote in its hand, sitting upright in a pair of underwear like it was watching something. Another time, it was sitting at the dinner table with a plate and fork set out.
He'd laugh when I'd react with surprise and say I was being too serious. The truth was, I was so busy in my life, and I looked at this living situation like just something I needed to do until I could get somewhere else. And it felt like this guy was having the time of his life living with me, even though I basically never interacted with him. It was weird. Anyway, I would roll my eyes and tell him he was funny and then just go about my business and forget about it. Then it started escalating. I'd find the dummy in places that weren't funny at all. I opened the bathroom door one morning and it was leaned up against the sink like it was waiting. Another time I went to take a shower and it was in there. It just kept going on, and this guy wasn't picking up on the fact that I was completely over it. He just kept going with it. The point where I stopped finding it even remotely funny was when I noticed it was wearing my clothes. I had a shirt go missing from my laundry, had asked him about it, and then a week later, there it was on the dummy, hiding in the closet. Let's not let that metaphor get lost on us either. I confronted him about it. He laughed it off, said it was just a joke and that I needed to lighten up. But it didn't feel like a joke to me. It felt like a line had been crossed. This guy didn't know me like that. I told him directly that it needed to stop, that it wasn't funny and it was making me uncomfortable. I told him if he didn't knock it off, I'd move out. The dummy stuff stopped and evidently he got the message. The atmosphere shifted though. He wasn't as loud or jokey with me anymore. He was quiet and reserved, almost like he was sulking all the time. I didn't want to push it further, so I just kept to myself. It was tense but manageable. Then came the night that I'll never forget. He had gone out and I went to bed before he came home from the bar. At maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up to this banging sound. Not like hammering, more like someone bumping into a wall, with muffled yelling mixed in. I thought at first he might have brought someone over from the bar and they were drunk and having an argument. But the energy of it was different. It sounded violent. I got out of bed, cracked my door open, and listened. All the lights were off and the noise was coming from his room, the door to which was wide open. I left my room and crept down the hall to look. When I peeked around the corner, he was in his room on his bed, crouched over the dummy, which was fully dressed in my clothes that I hadn't even noticed had gone missing yet. He wasn't just sitting there, he was straddling it, hands around its neck, choking it violently and punching it in the face. He had a pillow next to him that he would pick up and scream into. I have no idea what he was saying, but it was like he was screaming at the top of his lungs. He was hitting this thing so hard, if it was a real person, he would have beaten them to death. He was strangling it, spitting in its face, punching it, then slamming it against the mattress over and over. I don't even know how long I stood there watching. It was the single most terrifying thing I've ever seen. I backed away as quietly as I could, went back to my room and locked the door. Then, as quietly as I could, I barricaded myself in there. Then, I heard footsteps, quietly walking down the hall toward my room. They stopped right outside my door. It was silent. Then, I heard them turn around and quietly walk back to his room, where he shut the door, and that was it. I sat there in bed, wide awake until morning, when I packed up as much as I could fit in my car before he woke up and left. I paid out the rest of the month, but never went back. Didn't even go back for the rest of my stuff. There was no big confrontation, no police report, nothing to wrap it up neatly. I just got out. I have never seen a person that angry before in my entire life, and I genuinely don't know what would have happened if he realized I was standing there, right behind him. When I was younger, I would do this ride after work whenever I could. It was a county trail that started along some farmland, but the majority of it ran through a big forest. I would park in a church lot down the road, get my bike off the rack, and hit it. It was about a 10-mile ride or so. This was before cell phones were common, so no phone with me. It was late afternoon, well into the fall, and I was about 5 miles in and racing against the daylight. I pulled off to the side to take a quick break and drink some water, and that's when I thought I heard somebody. It sounded like a voice, but far away, almost like a shout. As far as I knew, there weren't hiking trails way out here, just deep woods. The only explanation that I could come up with was that maybe it was a person calling for a dog or something, but even that was a stretch. I waited for another couple minutes, but it didn't come again and it was getting dark fast, so I started pedaling down the trail again. I wasn't maybe 40 seconds further down the trail when I heard it once again. It was clearly a woman screaming in pain. I braked to a stop, got off and put my kickstand down, trying to figure out the exact direction it came from. The best description I have for how far away it sounded is like someone was yelling at the opposite end of a football field. I wasn't sure what I should do, but I knew that if someone was injured or needed help and I just completely ignored them, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. So I turned on my tail blinker just in case I needed help finding my way back to the bike and started walking into the woods. I'd say maybe 50 yards into the woods, I started seeing something through the gaps in the trees up ahead. It looked like boards. Maybe an old shed, hunting blind, or just some junk people had dumped. I stopped where I was and just listened. I hadn't heard the person again since I left the trail and was about to make a general call out when the sound came again. A hard, awful scream for help. It came from past the board somewhere. Then she did it again, but the scream didn't finish. It was just cut off midway by a loud bang. All the birds in the trees went crazy and flew away at the same time. I literally just dropped to the ground, belly down behind the nearest tree. Then I heard voices. 2 men. One of them was freaking out. I could barely make out any of it, but I definitely heard one of them say, "You killed her." From what I was able to hear, it sounded like they were trying to form some sort of plan, but also couldn't stop blaming each other at the same time. Then they went quiet, and I could hear random movement that I couldn't really place, maybe like a tarp or something. Then there was a sputtering sound from past the boards. It caught and went loud right away, sounded like a four-wheeler. I could hear them talking over the engine, but could no longer make out anything that they were saying. The sound faded down and then dropped for good. I didn't hear the men anymore, but there was no way to confirm whether one or both of them had left. I decided I had to get myself out of there either way, or risk getting completely lost in the woods in the dark. I got up to a crouch, pointed myself in the direction I felt like I had come from, and then as quietly as I could, just began hauling tail through the woods. I found my bike and pedaled for my life. When I came off the dirt onto the gravel by the church lot, my car was the only one there. I got the bike on the rack, then drove down the road until there was a gas station and called 911. A county car met me at the pullout and we went back up together, but it was too dark. When he realized how far in it had happened, they needed to call someone to bring a small ATV that I rode in on with them. I could not for the life of me accurately get us back to the exact spot. They didn't find anything that night and I felt like an idiot. I believe the next day they took a helicopter out to see what they could find, but there was no luck there either. I have a ton of guilt about it still. I feel like I let her down. If there was nothing else I could have done for that woman in that moment, I just wish I could have been able to bring law enforcement to where it happened, or to where her body may still be. My friends and I go riding a couple nights a week after work. It's a loop that starts near my friend's place and runs through a few parks and back roads around town. It's kind of half suburban, half woods. You get stretches that feel like you're out in the country, and then you cross a bridge and see streetlights again. We've been doing it for years, 4 of us. It had been raining off and on all day, but nobody wanted to call it off. We all work dumb hours, and this is what keeps us sane. The first few miles were fine. It was very casual. We were 2 by 2, just talking, catching up, and taking it easy. About halfway in, we hit this stretch that runs behind the neighborhood. There's a spot where the bike path crosses a side trail. That's where this other guy merged in behind us. We came to a stop sign where the bike path had to cross an intersection. We slowed down and he caught up to us. He made some comment about the rain being good for keeping the trail empty. He looked around 40, give or take. Average build, clean bike. On the other side of the intersection, he stayed with us, maybe 10 yards back. It was just kind of weird to cling to a group of strangers who were having a private conversation, just tailing us and listening, and we weren't going fast at all. Like whatever pace this guy had been keeping before he merged with us, I can almost guarantee you it was faster than we were going. A few miles later, the path split. The right fork runs closer to the water and cuts through heavier woods before looping back. The left is more open and goes around the park. My friend Tom was convinced the inside loop saves time and dragged us all into an argument about it. So we decided to race and meet him where the two trails rejoin. Tom took the inside route. The rest of us went left. The stranger said something like, "I'll follow you," but it wasn't clear who he meant. When the rest of us turned left, I saw his light go right, following Tom. The rain picked up around then. By the time we reached the point where the trails rejoin, it was full dark. Tom wasn't there. We waited. 5 minutes, 10. No lights coming from the other direction. Tom definitely would have waited if he had beaten us, and it would not have taken him this long to get here otherwise. Something about the whole thing felt off, so we started backtracking down the path they should have come from. A few turns in, you could see something at the edge of the path. Tom's bike, laid down on its side. The headlight was still on, half buried in the mud. No sign of the other guy. We pulled up next to it and yelled for Tom. Nothing. We were at a loss and just started walking our bikes off the trail a little, calling his name. Then, something moved about 20 feet ahead of us. It was Tom. He was kneeling down behind a bush, soaking wet, covered in mud, waving at us frantically to turn off our lights. We killed the beams and walked over. He was whispering, saying we had to be quiet. He said the guy had come up behind him after the split. At first, they were just riding side by side. Then, out of nowhere, the guy pulled a knife on him and told him to pull over. When Tom didn't, the guy started kicking at his bike while they were still moving and swiping at him with the knife. Tom said he jumped off the trail trying to get the bike between them and then ran into the trees. He said he could see the guy going back and forth on the path where Tom ditched his bike. Tom had been hiding for maybe 10 minutes before we showed up. As he was finishing up telling us this, we heard a voice down the trail. It was the guy. He was saying stuff like, "Hey, you good, man? Come on out. I was just kidding." His light moved between the trees. This was when our other friend had had enough and whispered he was going to go beat the hell out of this guy. He stood up to walk out from the dark and confront the guy, but as soon as he did, there was a hiss. The guy was slashing Tom's tires. Then his light turned away from the bike and started moving back down the trail. We watched until it disappeared around the bend. We couldn't ride out together with Tom's bike wrecked, and the rain was getting heavier, so we decided to walk back as a group. The entire time, you just kept expecting this guy to come suddenly biking up from behind us out of the dark. It was a nightmare. By the time we got back to my friend's driveway, we had been gone for almost 2.5 hours. We ended up just drinking in his basement for the rest of the night. Eventually, we were able to laugh about it because of how crazy it was. But I don't think any of us felt comfortable riding that path ever again, knowing some crazy person could just ride up beside you out of the blue and start trying to stab you. When I was younger, my brother and I would go out to our dad's hunting camp one night a weekend after hunting season was over and before it got too cold. It had electricity, but it was very basic. One room with bunks, a couch, a little kitchen with a table for games, and a wood stove. We also kept stacks of firewood underneath an overhang. Cell phones don't get service out there, but we were responsible and my dad trusted us to not be stupid. There are a couple other cabins on the way in, but we never saw anyone there. The night this happened, it was unseasonably warm, so we had the windows open. We heated up some food in the little oven, played cards, and watched half a movie until the laptop battery died. By 10, it was dead quiet outside. I was the last one awake. I started closing up shop and went to the front door to double check the latch. That's when I thought I heard something through the kitchen window, like leaves crunching. It stopped as soon as I started to listen. Nothing followed. I turned off the kitchen light and went to the bunks to lay down. I couldn't fully fall asleep because of how hot it was, so I just kept tossing and turning. Then I started hearing the sound again. I don't know how to really articulate it. It wasn't like a crunch and then stop, like something stepping on them. It was like a series of quick little crunches in sequence that would move from one place to another. I would hear it outside the window next to the bunks, then at the other end of the camp, then back again near the bunk window. That's when I realized how weird what was happening was and sat up in bed. As I listened closer, I could make out another sound with it. That ticking sound you hear when someone coasts on a bicycle. Someone was biking around the camp in the middle of the night. I woke my brother up. I didn't turn on a light, I just put my hand on his shoulder until he looked at me. I whispered to him that there was someone outside. He just stared at me like I was messing with him, and then he heard it too. The sound circled the cabin again and then stopped under the window next to the bunks, right next to us. My brother sat up in bed, then stood up and like an idiot turned on the bedside lamp, then pulled back the curtain to look out the window. What we saw was terrifying. It was a face pushed hard into the mesh of the window screen. The guy had his mouth open and was pressing his whole face, nose and tongue into the screen. My brother screamed, slammed the window shut, dropped the curtain, and turned off the lamp. The look we got of this guy was completely messed up. I don't know if it was because he was pressing his face into the screen and it was making his face look weird or something, but he looked completely disfigured. We both backed away from the window. My brother started panicking and asking me what the hell was going on, but all I could tell him was that I had heard a bike outside circling the camp. We both went around immediately, shutting all the windows and locking them. We squatted down below the view of the windows. I crouch-walked over to the wood stove, got the fire poker, and gave my brother the stove shovel. The next sound we heard was heavier. A thud on the front door. Another thud. Then there was a silence, and it just stayed quiet. I had the thought that it might finally be over when suddenly the window near the bunks shattered. A piece of chopped firewood from the pile under the overhang had been thrown through the window and landed on the floor next to us. There was now nothing separating us from this person outside, and I had no idea whether or not they'd found the chopping axe near the stack of firewood. Then a hand reached through the broken window. The guy was trying to pull himself up and in. Both of us snapped into survival mode and started hitting this guy's arm as hard as we could with the poker and shovel. He withdrew it almost immediately. There was another silence, and then you could hear him circling the cabin one more time before slowly riding away. Or that's what it sounded like, at least. He was making these weird wounded animal sounds as he rode off into the woods. We didn't turn the lights on. We just pushed what we could in front of the busted window and sat there waiting for the rest of the night to be over. As soon as the sun started rising, we got the hell out of there. When we got back to our house, our dad just about lost it. He got his rifle and took us right back to the camp. My dad went around knocking on the door to every single cabin on the road, but nobody answered. Nobody was out there at all. We were able to put up a temporary patch for the window, and then about a week later, we all went back out and my dad replaced it for real. But the most messed up thing about it is that after he fixed it, somebody came back and smashed out more windows again. And this time, they left the wood axe stuck in the front door. We don't have an explanation, except that somebody either lives in those woods near the camp or close enough to bike to it. Why they targeted our camp and none of the others is a mystery. And yeah, the window smashing was scary, but what would have happened if that guy had gotten in, where neither my brother or myself had anywhere else to run?